Good evening, Peter. You are muted, by the way.
Yes, I usually turn it on muted.
Yeah, I know.
Um,
How are you this evening?
I'm good.
Good. Tightrope has been very nice to give me a new way to monitor what's going on um, with the stream, which is very, very nice. I got I can show you what I now see. You just turned on the stream, both of the. You just turned on the stream. So when I first turned this on, it was not on.
Yeah, so I started Facebook and then I started the stream here, although it's not feeding to Facebook yet because I haven't told it to go live yet.
Let's see. Yes, it is. You just haven't told it to go live. It is streaming in that direction.
Right. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not live yet though.
And yeah, because I can see the incoming to the cloud service. It's been running for 2 minutes and 10 seconds. And it is going out to both YouTube and Facebook. And nice, clear, fresh video and audio. And there are no frames being dropped. It's nice and clean.
Sounds good. All right, I am gonna run and fill my water bottle and then I will be right back.
Okay. I'll be right here waiting for you, and I won't turn on TV3 till you're ready. Good evening. Sounds like someone heating up their dinner. Good evening, folks.
We're waiting for Caroline to come back.
Yes, she should be here any moment. She just went to get some water.
Okay.
I'm going to switch you over, Caroline. It takes a little bit of time. TV3 is running. I will be monitoring. Have a good meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Hi, guys. Let's see. So we're still waiting for some people. You want to give them a few more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. I'm
Sure,
just
that's
going to
fine.
scan the audience and see if any of them are in as attendees. They are not. Hey, Anna.
Hi, Caroline. It's Leanne.
Hey,
Not sure
Leanne.
if my name can be seen here. Oh, I'm showing up as Keith. I'm not sure how to do that.
I do have a question from the audience, Sam. Can I ask that before we start the meeting?
Leanne,
Sure.
if you put your if you put your mouse over the oh no, it's not showing up on mine. There should be a way to change that, Leanne. Hold on a second.
Yeah, I think there is, but I'm on
can,
my iPhone, so I think
I
it's.
can rename her.
Oh, okay.
Oh, great, Caroline. Thank you.
Yeah, if you go into participants and do it there.
All right, so
She did it.
I'm gonna mute you, Leanne.
Yep, no problem.
Okay. Rosemary, we haven't started the meeting yet, but do you have a procedure question or a non-meeting related question at this point? Oh, we can't hear you? We can't hear you. Can you unmute?
There. I think I'm on the board now. The planning board.
Okay, if you're a new appointment.
Yes.
Okay, yes. So if you want to watch tonight and participate,
Yep.
you could get sworn in and start at the next meeting. So welcome.
I did it already. I did the swearing in. So,
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So welcome.
Thank you.
All right, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Caroline, can you rename Dan as well?
Everyone wants to be you, Keith.
I know. No, they don't.
Okay, so Sam, I think you do have a full board whenever you want to call the meeting to order. We are feeding to cable, Facebook, YouTube, and we do have an audience tonight.
Excellent. Let me go take my seat here. All right. I would like to officially, I have to use my phone tonight, and I will find better light in a moment here, but the computer audio is not working. So in that 2020 way, I will officially call the meeting to order tonight. It is December 2nd, a couple minutes after 6, and we have a fairly light agenda tonight, but we will start with an informational exchange. Caroline, any information to exchange tonight?
Okay, so I will welcome Rosemary as our newest member. She was just appointed by the town council late last night, has already sworn in and is here. So that's a great sign. She's motivated to participate and make a difference. So we love it, Rosemary. We love that you're here. I'll reach out to you and we'll get you up to speed on how we do things and what we have going on. The first thing under information exchange tonight would just be an update on what kind of things the project review board's been up to. So at their last meeting, they did approve some site plan amendments for the Desert of Maine. That was related to their existing use out there and not the changes that might result as part of the overlay district that the planning board recommended to the town council last month. The board approved a site plan amendment at Linda Bean's Topside Tavern right in the heart of the village. There's a little ATM next to the restaurant. They are proposing to demolish that. They're going to put an addition and some outdoor seating on the upper level. They had a conceptual discussion regarding the Harrisseekit Yacht Club, who's looking to add some floats and put a hoist. No action was taken to approve that. That will come up on a future meeting. The second thing I wanted to connect with you about is I did send an email to planning board and project review board to see if anybody, as far as board members, was interested in taking advantage of the Maine Municipal Association training for board and committee members. I did reach out to them today. I did hear from Wayne and Anna that they had an interest. If you hadn't expressed your interest, but you changed your mind, it's not too late. They do have a live session coming up. If it's something that you're interested, but you just couldn't make the date, they do have a pre-recorded version that I can get you signed up for. So let me know, Rosemary, I'll share that with you. The timing's great. It'd probably be really beneficial, but email me directly, preferably tomorrow, if you do want to take advantage of that training. And then the only other thing I have for you is I did, after last month's meeting, you got substantial amounts of public comment in advance of the meeting. So whenever we get it in a timely fashion and there's an agenda item, we put it in your packets. In this case, I got additional public comment after the meeting. I have about, I think, 19 or 20 letters, and then there was also a petition that was submitted. Typically, I would hold that till the item appears back on the agenda, if and when. In this case, it wasn't on this month's agenda, but I didn't know what the preference of the board is. Do you want me to print and mail that additional public comment to you, or what are your thoughts on that?
I would take an electronic copy would be fine, at least for me personally.
Okay, I think it would be like about 50 pages. We usually don't get stuff after the meeting. We usually get it closer to, so that's why I wasn't sure how you guys want to handle it.
Can you tell us what the petition was about?
The petition was, against the conversation that you were having about the KB Enterprises application and the housing development. I think,
so it's kind of a moot point at this point, that particular petition.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of, there was some comments in there. I think, a lot of the letters had comments beyond the project. So that's why I asked the question of you.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think it's
Caroline,
always valuable.
I think just retain it, and if the topic comes up again, we can circulate it.
Well, I think if the public comment is beyond the scope of that particular discussion, it would be helpful for us to see it. I mean, if it was more general information in there. Is that what you're saying, Caroline? Is that it wasn't just
No,
specific to that?
A lot of it was submitted specific to that. Incidentally, could be some more, general comments in the mix, as were some of the other letters that you received. But yes, it all came in, as a result of that project, in response to that project. So, I think some cases they'll have shared their opinion on that project, but then maybe share their opinion on other things. I mean, you always have a public process and every other thing you talk about too. So, I'll leave it up to you, but it's out of the ordinary. It's a little bit different situation because we don't have it on tonight's agenda, but I do have additional information sitting here for you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, just getting an email.
Yeah. I wouldn't print mail necessarily, but I think if it's not too much work to compile it and email it out, I guess my feeling on it is there's as we discovered with the KV Enterprises, I guess it never even really made it to application, but there's people in town feel very strongly about the way that development should or should not be pursued. And I guess it's interesting to hear. So I'm sure that information will come out in other ways as well, but.
Okay, anyone else have thoughts as far as board members go? Okay, so hearing the majority of comment is to see it. I will forward that to you via email.
Thanks.
Okay, that's all I had under info exchange.
All right. So agenda item number 2 is a discussion with Keith McBride and the Freeport Economic Development Corporation on ideas for potential zoning changes or adjustments to density, and particularly with an eye toward adding residential development in different districts in town. I apologize, I don't have the agenda in front of me because I can't see it on my phone, but I think hopefully that's a passable synopsis at least. And Keith, I think it makes sense to let you take a few minutes to describe what you're hoping to talk about tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sam. I appreciate it. I would actually, I have a handful of slides that I'd like to share if Caroline can pass me over the ability to do that. And I promise that won't be long. I'm much more interested in hearing what the board has to say in response to it than hearing myself talk about it. So I brought with me today Leanne Nichols and Dan Bacon, both of whom are members of the FEDC board, and both of whom have particular sets of skills and expertise as it relates to development and housing. Dan is a former town planner himself and is working in an important development project for the state of Maine down in Scarborough, which includes a lot of residential housing. And Leanne is a residential realtor and I believe the president of the Greater Portland Board of Realtors, or past president. One of the two, but she's very, very influential in our local realtor community. So it's great to have both of them available to bounce things off of, especially as it relates to new housing development. So thank you, Caroline. Let me see if I can do this like that and share. Okay, is that working? Is everybody seeing that good?
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I'm going to take you back to the first slide because I don't want to spoil the ending. Okay, so that should be the title slide now. There's been some issues in Zoom meetings in the past of not seeing slides as they change. So are we back to the title slide? Okay, good. All right, thank you. Okay, good. So I appreciate that, and thank you for the chance to talk about this. I quickly want to go through some of the things that FEDC is about and what we're working on. And kind of brings you to where we are. This is our mission statement. It's what drives all of our activities. It's a partnership with the community, supporting sustainable economic growth that strengthens and diversifies the economic base and enhances the quality of life and unique character of Freeport. And although it doesn't necessarily speak directly to residential housing, it does speak to sustainable economic growth and strengthening and diversifying the economic base and the quality of life and unique character of Freeport. And we'll touch on a little bit why what we're talking about tonight, specifically related to downtown, is particularly pertinent. Our board is primarily Maine residents, I think with the exception of only 1 or 2 members. Dan and Leanne specifically included in that group. And it's all in all a great group of folks who volunteer their time and their expertise, many of them working in areas and industries that are particularly pertinent to our economic development and improvement strategy for Freeport. Since about 2019, early in 2019, we've decided that our primary focus is downtown. We think that downtown is the rising tide that's going to lift all the ships for Freeport. And we're seeing particular challenges in downtown, even before COVID came along, that we felt needed to be addressed specifically. So I won't read this statement to you. There's a couple of key phrases that are underlined. And one of the ones, of course, being the idea of having new residential development in there. And if you'd like to hear more about this, our strategic statement and our strategic vision, you're in luck. You'll be hearing lots about it. We're going to be talking about that increasingly as we go forward with a plan to collect a lot of public feedback and input and derive a strategic plan looking forward for the next couple of years of Freeport. And our board president, Mary Davis, and Tawny Whitney and Dan Pilch gave an excellent presentation to the town council last night on that process. Our strategic strategy, that's redundant. Our strategy on this involves 4 basic pillars: and diversifying the economy, removing some of those barriers, putting more feet on the street, and coordinated marketing. And I'm not going to go through our full strategy and how we're going after each 4 of those individual pillars, because that's kind of outside the scope of our discussion tonight. But I think this discussion about planning hits on all of those. And of course, all of what I've described was really put in place before COVID, and COVID has shifted a lot of it, but none of it is irrelevant. It's all still relevant. And in fact, we're finding that there's more of a need of it, and it's even more urgent in short term. So this holiday season, you'll notice a lot of activity on Main Street, including pop-ups in some of the stores, some of the window decorations, and other activities that are going on that FEDC and a sort of subcommittee of some interested stakeholders that has been lovingly dubbed the Street Gang have been working very, very hard. Purely volunteer efforts to put into place to make some interesting and exciting and joyful things happen, because quite frankly, this community and the whole world needs a holiday season this year pretty badly. So we're doing our best on all of that. But this is an overview of those pillars of our economic priorities for this year. And again, I won't read all these slides to you because some of it is outside the scope, but I would pinpoint you to the center one that talks about diversifying downtown. Overwhelmingly, and I'm going to get into the feedback that we've received from a bunch of different directions, but overwhelmingly, we're hearing that there are a lot of changes that could be made that could help bring more people to the street, and that when it relates to residential development, downtown is an attractive place for it, and it's a desirable place for it. The community is encouraging the town to look at downtown and what can we do downtown, what can be done there, and we're saying absolutely yes, let's talk about it. So let's get into some of that. This is the overview. Well, for tonight, I want to go through some of the feedback we've received and how we got to the bottom line, which is the recommendations that we're making. And a lot of that feeds into why these are relevant, has to do with the changes in the market. And I also do want to touch on why it's coming from us and why it's coming from FEDC now. So our feedback on this started with a stakeholders meeting that we held in July 2019 to talk about downtown. This is after we decided that downtown had to be our primary focus. We brought together folks that were from local businesses, local property owners, town council, planning and project review board, town staff, LL Bean, the chamber, Visit Freeport, FEDC. And we brought together as many people who we thought were the important stakeholders to talk about it. And we gathered a variety of feedback and asked the people who were there to kind of prioritize the feedback that were heard. And most relevant is that when we talked about when we talked about what could be done, we heard that one of the number one priorities should be diversifying the uses that exist downtown. And that includes office, that includes other services, and that also included residential development and redevelopment for some of the spaces that are currently there and are underutilized. We also heard a focus on mixed use, a live, work, play idea, which is very attractive. This is what people are looking for as they try to find places to live outside of big cities or moving from rural residential areas because they're finding themselves in an empty house because they have older children that have moved out and are looking to downsize. They still want to be in an exciting place. And downtown Freeport can offer really unique live, work, play options for folks in that
Did
situation.
we lose Keith there?
I don't think so. I think
No.
I'm still here. So am I still there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
Yes.
Sam scared me, or whoever said that scared me a little bit. So in September, we also got a bunch more feedback. We held a meeting specifically with a bunch of developers, the types of people who either are doing projects in Freeport or who we'd like to see doing projects in Freeport, or who have done projects in the past, to say, okay, so talk us through this and tell us honestly what it's like. And we heard extremely positive things. They like doing business in Freeport. They had great things to say about staff. They had great things to say about FEDC and the work that we're doing to help people who want to get things done in Freeport. But we also heard that construction prices have gone extremely high. And this is September 2019, that it's very difficult to get projects through because of things that the town necessarily doesn't have control over. That might be at the state level, might even be at the federal level. There might be tax issues. There are other financial concerns that we can't change with ordinances. And then one of the end results of that was that developer said anything that the town can do to help, you just simply cannot do enough. So take a look at whatever can be done at the local level and see if you can make those changes if you're trying to drive a specific type of the right type of development for Freeport. And lastly, once COVID hit, again, it was a big shift and we had to kind of take a look at where we were going. And in doing so, we again reached out to a lot of those same stakeholders. And in that, we've heard since March 2020, we've heard overwhelming support for downtown residential as a way to support downtown businesses. And we've also heard a lot of it from the residents. I mean, Caroline touched a little bit on the public feedback that came in from the KV Enterprises project that was discussed last month or the month before, whenever that was. And we heard over and over again, a lot of the residents who spoke up on that saying, what can we be doing downtown? And it was music to my ears, because that's exactly where we are right now, talking about what can we do downtown. And if there's an interest in this from the community to talk about how we try to do things to help boost what's going on downtown and revitalize and re-energize, then we're all for that. And this is one way we think it can be done, by helping bring more feet on the street through residents who are going to live there 24/7, 365 days. Well, not 24/7. They'll probably go to work, but they will be there and living there. They will not be seasonal traffic, which is something that typically we've had to survive with here in Freeport. We've seen dramatic market changes. The demand in housing has gone extremely high. And I pulled this little quote and some data from the Maine Association of Realtors, pointing out what's happened since to home sales and home demand, housing demand and prices in the last year. I don't think this is news to anyone, so I don't want to dwell on it. But I think we know that demand is up, prices are up, and interest rates remain historically low. And all of that presents a pretty good scenario for housing developers and for housing builders. It's a good time to be a seller. But at the same time, construction prices remain pretty high. But what we're hearing from developers is that we might be reaching that equilibrium where those high costs are justified because of the prices that they're able to get. And that presents a really good financial opportunity with low interest rates for people who are interested in developing housing, which is why we might be seeing more of that interest coming out in recent times. Also, not a surprise on what's going on in our retail sector. We've been talking about this for some time. We know that through pressure of things like online shopping, the per square foot sales for brick and mortar retail has been dropping, which means that there's a lot of downward pressure on rents. And landlords that we've spoken to have absolutely confirmed that they're having trouble finding tenants, and that the tenants they have are requesting reduction in rents. And all that means is a lot of downward pressure. And that results for us an increase in vacancies. I plopped this little chart in here, and what's most interesting about this chart is that typically in Q3 of every year into Q4, we see our vacancy rates drop, because Q3 and Q4 are the times of the year that are most busiest in town. We're talking about late summer and into the holidays. And so we see people wanting to get in for that time period. Typically Q1, we always see an increase because that's when businesses will try to make it through the holiday season and then close. An example of that would be Abercrombie and Fitch, who left the Bartoll Library right at the end of the holiday season in 2018. So we typically see the dip in Q3. Well, in Q3 this year, we saw an increase, and that was a little bit not head scratching, but it was a little bit concerning. We don't know where these numbers are going to go in the future, and I don't want to make a projection on that because my crystal ball tends to be really cloudy. But that data that we have collected on Q3 was a little bit of a concerning turn of events, although not all that surprising given what we've seen from COVID. The result in all this, we have high interest in housing development and in redevelopment as well. We have existing spaces that are underutilized, and we've had a number of landlords come forward and say, okay, so if I was going to do condos here, if I was going to put a couple units in my building, what would that look like? How would I do that? What would the barriers to that be? And also, it's worth mentioning that the parking changes that I know Caroline worked awful hard on, gathering a lot of data, presenting that to working with our former town planner as well to present that to town council to get those changes implemented, and they were implemented in early 2019. One of the things that's accomplished is it's freed up a lot of those parking areas, those seas of asphalt we have off of Main Street for potential development, and that has also generated a lot of interest. So my calculation and tracking some of the inquiries we've gotten, just in this year alone, I count 8 different prospective projects. Some of them are still in sort of exploration. Some of them have been opted out of for various reasons, costs of redevelopment, things, again, that we don't necessarily have control over, life safety improvements, sprinkler systems. Some of the buildings you'd have to punch in a second exit, for life safety reasons. Other of them are zoning related and things we will talk about tonight. And other of them are still in development or in at least exploration tonight. And as I sit here tonight, and I'm hoping some of those projects will actually get done because they are good projects. So our role in this and why we're here talking about it and bring it to the planning board, because we don't have a stake, we don't own property downtown, and we're certainly not going to be building any housing. It fits in with our mission, and it's worth repeating. And it fits in with our primary focus, which is downtown. And one of my former board presidents coined the phrase of us being table setters. And what he meant by that was to say that it's our job to make sure that the landscape is ideal in the best case possible to attract the type of development we want to attract to Freeport. And the types of things that we feel like are going to make a difference, and that are the sustainable economic growth that the town needs to have to balance its tax base and to continue the unique quality of life and character of the town. So that's what we mean when we say the right type of development for Freeport. All right. So cutting to the chase, we have recommendations for what we think would be impactful changes to our zoning ordinance that would help encourage and allow for more residential housing downtown. And I'm going to jump through this slide for a second. Just to be clear, I want the board to know what it is that we're talking about here. So I've kind of given you this little section of our current zoning map to look at. So you can see, I think everybody's probably pretty familiar with what this map looks like and knows where 295 is and the train tracks in Main Street. So I won't go through that too much, but the VC1 is primarily what people consider to be our main downtown district. What I would suggest is that the changes we look at could have applicability to VC1, but might have a greater impact if we can look beyond that at all the VC zones, VC1, VC2, VC3, and VC4. And the reason for that is even though we do have land available there, there's even more potential available for redevelopment in some of those other districts. And there's also some land available specifically. There's some over in VC4. There are a couple lots in VC1, but again, not many at all. And there's some also potential redevelopment options in VC3 and maybe also VC2, although I'm not aware of anything in that district at the moment, but it seems odd to just leave that one out. So our recommendations on this revolve around 5 topics, and the 5th one I think I just touched on is trying to unify those across all of the districts. One of the barriers that I think we've talked about removing for development in Freeport, and we've talked about this a lot at the project review level, and also in a joint committee to talk about number 4 on this list, design review, which is trying to simplify things. That in itself can be a great fuel to spur development, simplification of the zoning ordinance and of the regulations. But for the most part, we've prioritized density, and by that I mean housing units per land area. The idea of mixed use and how we can talk about that as it relates to first floor residential, and building heights. Design review is something that's already been in the works, and I think reinvigorating that effort to take a look at design review would also be a really positive thing. And then talking about how we can unify this and simplify it across the VC zones to help provide for better development and redevelopment options. So I created this simple, easy to follow chart, and I have to move this because it's in the way of part of my chart. There we go. So land area per dwelling unit, this is all related to VC1. So the current zoning regulation down the center column there is VC1 regulations as they exist today. Land area per dwelling unit, 2,000 square feet. Land area per dwelling unit as a zoning regulation obviously has a long history and in many zoning ordinances, but it's regulation designed to maintain a rural character, to maintain a distance between units. When you're talking about a dense downtown, more urbanized area, it doesn't really apply as well and doesn't make as much sense. So it could come to 0. And that doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. It just means that we have other regulations that will regulate what can be done per lot. We have lot size restrictions. We have height restrictions, which we're going to talk to in a moment. And of course, through the code, through the building code, there are certain things you can and can't do to have something constitute a housing unit. And that would fall under, Nick Adams' jurisdiction to say you can't just pile people on top of each other and call that a multi-unit place. It's got to fit certain restrictions. So you could have the change of that come down to 0 and have the units available in each particular lot dictated by those other restrictions. Because again, it doesn't make a lot of sense to limit that unless you're trying to space out the units over a rural area to maintain, a rural character and a rural rhythm to how development is done. Building heights, the original building height restriction of 35 feet, which came from whatever it was, 1976 zoning ordinance, was based on the height that the fire trucks could get to in the event of a fire. Well, obviously that's not relevant to us anymore. Our fire trucks, I think they can get over 100 feet now, but the ordinance remains at 35. And I think there's some comfort in that because the community doesn't want to see things to be overbuilt and built out of scale. And I know from a design review ordinance standpoint, the project review board has talked a lot about keeping things in scale. But we could define things in stories, and that allows a housing developer to figure out with more clarity without having to worry about measuring the 4 corners of a building and to have to possibly get a contract zone the way the Berenson folks did when they were looking at their redevelopment, because our Main Street slopes steeply downhill from Main Street down to the train tracks. And anything on that side of Main Street is going to have to face pretty big challenges when talking about the building heights. And likewise, something that's farther lower, I think this board had talked about it in relation to some of the parking lot overlay discussion before when the design restrictions on that came up, was that something taller down there wouldn't necessarily be out of scale because it's so much lower in the topography. But defining building height by stories not to exceed a certain number of feet gives a much clearer definition for a developer to figure out how many units they can fit in the space. That becomes one of those things that can regulate the land area per dwelling unit rather than having it done by zoning. Mixed use, I know, is something that the board recently addressed, changing the definition of mixed use for an area on Route 1 South to allow for residential and commercial to exist in the same building and not just on the same lot. And unfortunately, it's not an allowed use in the VC1, which seems in the VC1 district, which seems a little bit strange because it seems like that's a place where we should absolutely be encouraging mixed use. It would also kind of change the idea that one dwelling units are not allowed on a first floor. And it seems like if we're not talking about building single family homes, which is not an allowed use in the VC1, and not proposing to change that, but I would suggest that if there was going to be a mixed use business residential structure, we shouldn't necessarily be so concerned with what's on the first floor, what's on the second floor. We should instead be concerned with allowing mixed business and residential uses to exist in the same building in different forms. So allowing that in the district, I think, would be a really worthwhile and make it a change that makes a difference. And lastly, there's been a lot of talk about design review as a barrier to development. There's, especially at the project review board level, there was a committee that was engaged. I know that Sam was involved in that. Caroline was involved in that. And I believe there's one other member of the planning board, might have been Aaron, but I don't recall.
I think it was Jamel.
Oh,
and Jamel. Yeah, so Jamel moved out of town.
That's why. That's why
yeah.
I'm having trouble picturing. Yeah, it was Jamel Torres. That's right. And members of the project review board were engaged, and there was a consultant working on that. And COVID sort of blew that entire thing up. I would like to see that committee re-engaged. I've talked to members of my board and do have some volunteers from FEDC who would like to take part in the discussion, including Nikki Yannick, who may or may not be here with us tonight, who is not only a member of my board, but she's also a downtown resident. So said that she thought that she would be a good fit, and I agree. So I'd like to see that group re-engaged. I've talked to Caroline a little bit about that, and I think that's something we could possibly look into. But I will add that I do want to get the conversation started on these things. I think the timing is good for it, especially given the feedback we've gotten from the community and continue to get about what we're doing with downtown and how what we're going to put into place to address it, and a lot of the feedback we've gotten about residential development in Freeport. The idea, the two other pieces that we've heard a lot about are environmental sustainability and impact costs. What does it cost? How many kids does it put in school? What's the impact on infrastructure? What's the impact on town services? And we believe, and we're engaging with a financial and economic analysis firm to try to help us come up with some metrics on this. But the best case scenario for environmental sustainability and for town fiscal impact is denser housing. When you're talking about the most destructive forms of housing development for environmental sustainability and financial impact to the municipality, it's what we currently have in our rural residential districts. Sprawl pattern, 2.5 acre lot, single family units. It's very destructive for both of those things, environmental sustainability and fiscal impact. So we think that what we've heard from the community on some of these projects in the past, that those are two extremely important values that the community holds. It seems like this is a good way to tap into that. And I know our hope is that there will be some language that comes out of this discussion for the planning board to consider and have a public hearing on before referring it to the town council for approval and adoption into the zoning ordinance. And I expect that will be a good discussion. And I'm hoping that, what we've heard in the past about what is the right type of housing development for Freeport will bear out in that public conversation. Because we've collected a lot of that input, and we think this captures a lot of what we've heard as being desirable. So I would invite, I know Dan Bacon is here from my board, and Dan's input is certainly welcome, and Leanne as well. And I've kind of been on a roll here, so I do want to shut up for a second and give them a chance to correct me if I've misstated anything or if I've missed anything. But most importantly, I also do want to hear from the board and answer any questions that you might have as well.
Thanks, Keith. I can jump in real quick, but I think you did a great job of providing the background as to why FED is super interested in working with the planning board on this. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
I want to make sure. Just a few things to I guess maybe emphasize more than anything. One is that our FEDC conversations have been that, denser condo apartment type housing, whatever you like to kind of describe it as, would be kind of key to spur additional activity downtown, kind of maintain or reinvigorate vibrancy and activity, especially in these times. hopefully with the vaccine, we'll be out of these times, by the time housing is going up downtown. But big picture, I think it's kind of key to spur additional and other types of commercial development that can rely on housing or benefit from housing. And I think Keith mentioned this as well, like having more housing choice just in Freeport. I think there's a lot of families that have enjoy raising their kids here, but don't have the house to or the housing to go to after the single family house on 2.5 acres, as Keith was describing. So providing that in town and what a great kind of location that would be. I think of the potential of the train downtown, and it being, there's potential that Freeport could be, accessible to Portland via the train in a few years, should that be more of a commuter opportunity. So I think there's a lot of maybe millennials or the other end of the spectrum would really kind of benefit and be interested in Freeport as a destination if the housing was right in the center of town. And the only other point I wanted to add before turning it back to planning board is I do a fair amount of this type of development in other communities, and 1 and 2 bedroom in particular, kind of multifamily type housing, whether it's condo or rental apartments, generally has a significant kind of positive ROI to the town. So you think about the tax base in Freeport and waning retail growth, concerns about commercial development, and often towns are really interested in commercial development from a tax base standpoint. Really multifamily type housing that doesn't have 3 or 4 bedrooms is generally a pretty positive ROI for the community. So it's a good alternative to the commercial development that probably Greater Portland, Freeport, and the world won't be seeing for a while in light of the times we're in, because office development is likely to be down for quite a while. People are adapting maybe quite well to working from home, and there's benefits of that, certainly. So it's something to be thinking about in terms of the town's kind of tax revenue and growth sectors, and thinking more about residential as a source of tax revenue and positive tax revenue to the community. So I think that's another factor to be considering. So with that, I think Keith's laid out a great presentation and some good kind of regulations to consider this evening, and hopefully we can come to some good ideas and move forward.
Leanne, is there anything that you'd like to add as a member of the FEDC before we?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sam. I guess I'd just like to say that we've been having this really pretty exciting and intense conversation for, it feels like 2 years. And as Keith talked about, we sought input from developers and a variety of different people. And I think there's some really great recommendations that have been distilled that hopefully can make really great sense to you all as well. And I am hearing from my commercial colleagues that that there's a lot of concern within the commercial sector. So I think we'd be wise and very strategic and forward thinking to consider something like this, especially during a time when I think there's 4 houses for sale in Freeport right now. So in my entire career, I've never seen such a shortage of housing. And we do seem to be one of the destinations that people are looking to relocate to as they reconsider the impact of these types of things that are happening in the world and quality of life, those sorts of things. So thank you for your time. And we really appreciate the opportunity to share our thoughts with you.
Certainly. I think, this is something that the board has talked about before, some of these changes. And I think it's exciting to me, I think, to be back here. And it's been almost a year, I think, since some of these discussions got derailed by the pandemic. And I think it's probably time to start them up again. And, I think some of these things, if there are specific barriers that we can act on quickly, I think that would be great. I mean, I do worry about some of these being, reactionary to or I want to make sure, I guess let me back up. I want to make sure that we're not just reacting to a demand that exists right now. And by the time we've reacted and anything's been built, we're 2 or 3 years down the line, and maybe, so I just want to, I think, keep that in mind as we move forward. But yeah, absolutely. I think, I think that the ideas that Keith laid out are good ideas, and we should definitely, move. And I'm speaking personally here. I think, I'd love to see some of this move forward.
Yeah, and I think, Sam, just to speak to that reactiveness, I think definitely I hear you on that. And, as we all know, real estate markets can be very cyclical. At the same time, our thought process has been sort of maturing over a 2-year process before it got to the point that it's at now. And I think we are proving to be a pretty significant destination for relocations. Relocations to our area are up. I feel that it's probably a more stable direction for us to go in. I think there's a lot too that FEDC is doing to try to support the businesses as well in our town that exist, because we have a lot of participation from people like Chip Gray and the Harris Seekit. So I think, we're definitely an LL Bean, obviously, clearly that's a huge component of our tax base and a huge component of our town. But having sort of a mixture of the diversity that additional residential would bring, I think would be really helpful overall. And there is sort of that demand, but I think it's been pent up for quite a while. So I don't.
Speaking personally, again, sorry to cut you off there.
Yep.
It's hard on Zoom. I think, again, I am 100% in agreement, and I think I'm on the record over my entire course of the time on the board as being fully in favor of developing more residential in downtown. As somebody who lives pretty close to downtown myself, it's great. It's there are lots of advantages, and I think there are lots of advantages to pursuing that. And I think you're right that hopefully it'll bring stability and in turn promote other kinds of development downtown too. To have people living and working in a I see a lot of positives. I just want to make sure that the changes we make are good changes, not just now, but for the next 10 years. So
would this be a good time to remove
and beyond?
Could we remove the slide from the screen so we could see each other again?
Yeah, let me give you back the privileges, Caroline.
Thank you.
I had a question. Thank you, Keith. That was really helpful and interesting and exciting to hear about.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, I think it's a little bit of a chicken before the egg kind of question of like residential development, we build that and then does the rest come? But has there been any discussion about more happening downtown in terms of development of like a restaurant or gathering spaces, or even as simple as like a playground? Something that'll start to bring families as a destination to Freeport, not just for retail.
Yeah, absolutely. There is talk about, more experiential things in downtown, and that includes everything from arts and culture to more family-oriented assets. There's been talk about a lot of the things you mentioned. There's been talk about more events that are, kind of designed to bring more attention to the winter wonderland that can be downtown Freeport. What can we do from January to March that will increase our increase the spot on the map we already have because of the great branding and the great reputation we have as a place for people to come and experience. So all of those things. It's a little bit, I really did want to touch on that, but I didn't want to touch on it because it's a little outside the scope of the planning board discussion. But I would definitely encourage anybody who's interested in it to pay close attention and to please, we want your opinions and we want your voice to be a part of the strategic planning effort that we're going to be going into, that is going to be designated, or I should say designed around exactly what types of actions we can be taking downtown and on a short-term basis. We're looking out 2 years, 2 to 3, to help enhance those very things for downtown Freeport. So I would love to talk about that tonight, honestly, but unfortunately, I think it would be a little bit outside of the board's purview tonight, but we will get there, I promise.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks.
I have a few questions.
Sure, go ahead, Wayne.
Well, first of all, excuse my ignorance, but who funds the FECD?
Oh, I probably should have gone into that. So we're a private nonprofit, and we are funded. All our operations are funded by the town through TIF funding. So it started as a private organization that the town at some point went, we like what you're doing. What can we do to help? And it turned into a funding partnership and a very close, tight relationship where we take a lot of our direction from the community on exactly what our economic development goals should be. And then it's our role to put them into action. That's how I see it. So it is it's very unique. There's only one other community in Maine that I'm aware of that has a similar, relationship between municipal functions and economic development, and that's Scarborough. But I believe it's a structure that works especially well for Freeport.
Thanks. And I have like 5 or 6 questions. If you want me to run through them all now, I could do that. Or if you want me to wait my turn, I can do that.
Oh, I think your turn has arrived.
Okay. So in your conversations with developers, how ready do you find developers to actually build if the obstacles were removed? Are people really ready to start doing projects in Freeport?
Varying levels. Some of them I would say absolutely yes. And there are some projects that are being considered now that I know are at that stage. They're ready to start bringing something forward for project review, for site plan and all that kind of thing. There are some others that are exploring an option. I wouldn't say kicking a tire because that sounds a little diminutive, but there are some that are seriously considering options for, is this a housing development project, or is this a commercial development project? Are we looking at offices here? And they're kind of considering it as, one piece, or and then there are other, landowners who have existing buildings who are saying, I don't know what else to do with this, upstairs location. What would it look like if I had to try to turn this into residential? And they're trying to explore what those barriers might be. So it's varying degrees.
And to what extent do zoning issues become the primary concern of these potential developers?
I would say it's frequent. And we've prioritized this list, I think, based on which ones, the density issue is one that we've heard from a couple of different developers, because density really is the special sauce that can make these projects work. On their pro formas, they're looking at, if I got to build a building between now and the day when I start either selling or leasing units, what is it going to cost me? And then once I do start leasing units, what's my revenue potential? And that revenue potential is driven entirely by the number of units that they can either sell or lease. And the more units, the better potential they have to cash flow what it costs to get a building from a parking lot or an empty lot to constructed.
In your letter to the planning board, I think you teed up the issue of whether there should be a number of individual zoning changes or one big global zoning change. Can you say something about that? Do you have an opinion about that?
Well, if I'm thinking of the right language that you're referring to, I think what I was suggesting is that we have a number of different recommendations that are reflected on this chart, but that what might make the most sense and could be a real positive change to help encourage more development in and of itself is to unify those across multiple zoning districts, where, is instead of having to play hopscotch and say, what is it here? Oh, well, what is it there? And what is it there? Unifying it, simplifying regulations sometimes is an economic development benefit in and of itself.
So more of a global zoning change would be what you would advocate.
I think, can I take a stab at that one?
Yeah, sure.
So I think there's a couple of issues. There's some low-hanging fruit that I think we could pick here pretty quickly. We could, to take the extreme example, we could eliminate the density requirement, and that would be a fairly straightforward, at least from a process perspective, a fairly straightforward change to make to the zoning in the VC1, say, if we chose to do that. But I think if we wanted to take a broader look at this and really change the zoning downtown in a bigger way, that would be a big project. It would probably take a lot of time, and I think we may benefit from doing some of both, because I think, Keith, you're absolutely right there, and this is something that we talked about on that joint working group with members of the project review and the planning board and Keith and Caroline and a whole or a bunch of people, probably what 15 people there, and we started to talk about design review and putting the design review, eliminating the overlay districts and the overlapping overlay districts that deal with different parts of design, and coming up with one set of guidelines for design downtown. And I don't think we talked specifically about combining VC districts, which is the sense I got here, Keith, that you're suggesting that might be an avenue to explore, is just getting rid of the VC 1, 2, 3, 4 and just having a VC district with one set. No,
I think what I'm just saying is that, I wouldn't necessarily nuke all of the VCs and turn them into one district. I think what I'm saying is that these changes, if you're going to change the density in the VC1, you could also change the
same density
across the VCs. And that's why, Wayne, I think the term global makes me a little bit worried, because I don't want people to get the impression that I want to apply this across the entire zoning map. We're talking specifically about downtown and how we choose to define downtown as a potential development area for new residential. It might just be VC1, or it might be all the VCs, or we might look at some of the other downtown adjacent districts. I don't want to define it beyond saying that across at least all the VCs, I think captures what most people, as they're driving through and your eyeballs are hitting the district that you're in, would say, if you're on Mallet Drive, I think you're still saying I'm downtown, even though technically it's a VC2 district, so it seems not to let that map and the lines that have been drawn on that zoning map define for us where this district begins and ends and where we would necessarily want to see downtown housing developed. I guess that's all.
And I didn't really mean global in that super global sense either. I just meant as opposed to, project level, small zoning changes. So let me ask you another couple of questions. In your analysis and your monitoring of the diminishment of retail in downtown Freeport, how much of it do you think is attributable to COVID? And if the pandemic miraculously ended next month, how much of it, if any, would come back?
Both very tough to say. I obviously have a better feel for what's happened in the past than predicting what might happen in the future. So I would say that the traffic data that we've received has showed that there's been a significant decrease in, on the scale of, early in COVID, you're looking at, 20 to 30% of traffic. And then as the summer went on, we were getting, 50, 60% of what our normal traffic would be. Most businesses that I've talked to have gotten comfortable with the idea that they're going to finish 2020 with somewhere around, somewhere between 50 and 75% of their ordinary annual revenue. And they've already run the numbers on whether or not they think that's going to be enough to get them through the year so that they can survive to see 2021. And many of them are still holding their breath and hoping that things turn around faster rather than later. But that's really all I can say from that standpoint.
You don't really have any way to form an opinion about whether they would come back.
I don't. I mean, it's very hard to predict, because not only are we talking about the elimination of the pandemic from a medical standpoint, if that magically could happen, the economic impacts of that are still kind of yet to be determined, and how long that recovery would take. When you think back to the economic crisis we endured in 2008, 2009, the recovery was a lot slower than that was predicted, even after the global financial crisis abated. From a banking standpoint, anyway. So it's very hard to predict recovery.
Okay. So as you convert from commercial to residential, have you done any analysis about the tax revenue impacts on that kind of switch from commercial to residential?
I'll actually let Dan touch on that. I mean, we're looking at it.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, based on some other projects I'm working on and have worked on, condo type and apartment style housing when it's limited in size, in bedrooms in particular. So more for single people or couples versus families. Per square foot, actually have a higher tax value than commercial. And from a services standpoint, in most cases, I can't say in all cases, but in most cases have low service needs by the town. So they're actually better than or rival like office type development. If you think of like in a condo association or apartment complex, it's generally private parking in addition to the buildings. It's generally private trash service. It's like, so the services, and if there's not school kids, there's not that obligation. So long story short, it's a very, it's very similar to commercial, in some cases better, but it's hard to generalize because there's, but it is, like I said, more dependent on bedrooms, so if you get into more bedrooms, then you're more likely to have that school component with children.
And
Wayne, I'll add to that just really quickly that we have talked with a firm that will do the economic analysis, and the hope is that they'll provide us with a framework to be able to either plug in a specific proposed housing development or a general one and just say, okay, what if we added 50 apartment units to downtown, what would that do? And to be able to at least come back with some data and some metrics that we can provide to the town. And I think that would be useful not only for this conversation specifically to downtown, but also for the conversation that Caroline and the town council were talking about last night, which is going into a broader comprehensive plan effort to look at potential growth strategies and growth targets. And what does it mean if we get this much growth? What does that do to our infrastructure, sewer, water, power? How is it going to impact that? How is it going to impact the schools? How is it going to impact municipal services like plowing? How is that going to impact fire, police, safety? It's a multifaceted sort of analysis that we'll need some help, and we're looking for that help. And I think we found it, but not quite ready to say that we're there yet.
Yeah, I just want to add two quick things, Wayne, for you. Like nationally, business parks are converting to multifamily developments. You think of sort of like in the 80s and 90s, executive business parks were the rage for economic development. They're now, since the last 10 years or so, since the recession of 08, those have been in many cases converting to or ending up being developed as kind of higher density residential and having similar kind of economic benefits. And I would say the other thing about kind of housing like that versus, say, a large office building or retail for that matter, is sort of long-term tenancy. If you have a big office building, you lose your big corporation. It's a lot harder to fill that space. I guess we're experiencing that to a degree in terms of retail on downtown versus if it's just for retail and retail is trending down, it's hard to fill that space versus a housing project. So that's something to keep in mind from a resiliency standpoint moving forward.
Thanks. And of the retailers who have left, were any of those recipients of TIFs?
No, we don't have, the tenants that are renting spaces are not eligible for TIFs. And most of the retailers that have chosen to leave have been tenants of spaces.
Okay. I just have one more question. The types of development that you've been discussing with these potential developers, are they mostly going to be new structures, like perhaps in the parking lots that could be converted, or are we also talking about existing structures having, sort of renovated with condos above the stores or something like that?
Yeah, it's both. It is both.
Okay.
And we'd love to encourage both. I think that, looking at some of those spaces for redevelopment into residential is a great way to, to revitalize some of them. And landlords, I think, would love to do it because they see the increased demand. But there are cost issues and, other things.
So when you say both, the developers you've talked to, 50-50, half of them are interested in one and half the other, or how does it break down?
You know what? It actually is probably pretty close to 50-50 by number of projects, but the redevelopment ones tend to be a little bit smaller because the existing buildings in downtown are, tend to be smaller. So you're talking about one project that might produce 2 units versus a new construction that's looking at, in order to cash flow a brand new construction, you'd need to have a larger number of units in order to make it financially worthwhile. So by projects, yeah, it's probably 50-50. By units, no, we're talking about much more newer.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you, Wayne.
Thanks.
Sam, I just wanted to add a little bit of, side background for your new members, Wayne and Anna and Rosemary, that, housing in the village is something you as a board did talk about pre-COVID. After the parking requirement did change, the planning board spent some time, I would say late 2018, early 2019, talking about, making some similar changes. It was a little bit different setting because they were talking about, Wayne, actually what you just mentioned, parking lot redevelopment. I think this is a little more broad conversation, but the planning board did have a history of talking about, looking at changing some of these things, like possibly eliminating the land per dwelling unit requirement, looking at some aspects of design review and looking at, allowing some changes to building height. So although our board's different and we need to look at it, with a fresh set of eyes, there is some history that this was on the radar pre-COVID in a slightly different format with some of the same concepts.
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity here to take, the goals that we were trying to achieve with the parking lot redevelopment overlay district. It even had a snappy title. I think we could tackle some of those density building height goals in a broad zoning, a zoning change that applies to the entire district. And then we could probably hit the design side of it in the way that it should have been done from the beginning, which was to do an overhaul to the entire design guidelines for the whole district and not just apply this new sort of partially, what would have been adding yet another layer of design guidelines to downtown, where we already have, by some measures, 3 different layers. So I see an opportunity here to do it kind of the right way. And I think some of those easier things, or easier again from a process standpoint, changing zone, changing density, and maybe adjusting building heights throughout the VC districts. We could probably do that pretty quickly, and the design side of it, I think would take a little bit longer, but maybe that's okay. And maybe some of those changes would allow. Do you think some of those? If we eliminated the density requirement, again, to take the extreme example, would that help developers in the short term, Keith, or is that just one piece of what needs to change? What do you think the biggest, if you had to pick the 2 biggest constraints right now?
Well, I think we've prioritized them on this chart. I think density right now would have an impact. And again, we're trying to be proactive in this planning effort. I'm not here on behalf of any project, because there's nobody who's come forward and said, this is my project and this is what I need to get it done right now, so do this in the short term. That I find it to be sort of reactive planning and reactive zoning, and it's just a bad way to go about doing this type of work. So we're trying to be proactive and collect feedback and say, all right, so what are we hearing, and what do we think? And what are we hearing from the community? And I've talked with Caroline about this a number of times, about how she sees the impact of different zoning changes. They're not going to, I don't want to propose something that's going to cause mass chaos. So let's make sure that we're on some solid ground. So I think what we've come up with here are the impactful changes that could be made based on the right type of development for downtown, and the right types of changes that would still have a really positive impact, top to bottom in priority. So density being at the top of it, and the second part of it being the change to the building heights, because that also impacts the potentially amount of density that's allowed on any one of these sites.
I'm pretty much in favor of just eliminating the density requirement downtown, or at least dramatically reducing it. I don't, I think there are other, like you said in your slides, there are other things that dictate, a housing unit needs to have a bathroom, sanitation, and needs to have a kitchen. And so, we're realistically, and it needs to meet market demands too. So we're not going to end up with, 80 square foot apartments or something ridiculous like that. I think the market is going to dictate the size, and I don't see the density requirement as doing. I think the balance is that it does more harm than good. So
Yeah.
that's where I
think
stand
just to
personally.
Add on that, I think spatially also, like parking requirements, lot coverage, height, those are really the drivers ultimately of density, because I think you're still going to require 1.5 or 2 parking spaces per unit. And Caroline knows these rules. I don't, but those types of things are going to ultimately dictate, versus a somewhat arbitrary square footage per unit that doesn't make sense in our opinion at this point.
Yeah, I think Dan's right. I think that's one difference between, things you've talked about in the past and what you have here today. The idea is presented here is to get rid of that land per dwelling, but they're not talking about, at this point, changing parking, changing setbacks, changing impervious area. Design review would still be in place. So although you might consider altering the height requirement, a big portion of design review is compatibility and scale. And although, it's been acknowledged, I think, by many people on the call tonight that there's some repairs and updates we could do to design review. Nobody's saying get rid of it. So that would still, I think, add another layer of protection to make sure we get historically the look of something that Freeport's looking for, even if the land per dwelling unit requirement were to go away.
Keith, do we know where the threshold is? So if we, we're trying to promote development, at what point, if we lower the density basically to 0, at what point where's the threshold where it will overburden, town services? Is there any concern that if we just eliminate that and really try and promote development downtown, is there a chance in your mind that would be overdeveloped and we would have to, that would overburden the town services?
Well, I see Peter Joseph on the call, and I would probably trust his opinion on the town services better than mine. But my understanding of it is that right now we have the sewer district that has not reported capacity issues. That would be one of the things we'd be worried about overburdening with adding housing units. We have water, which is ditto. Power is not a concern. The big concern that comes out of the community, and rightfully so, and we heard a lot about it on the KV project, is the schools. And I think Dan is right. And I think the analysis would bear out that when you're talking about this pattern of development, you're not talking about very much of an impact to schools. But again, we've been talking with someone to do exactly that fiscal analysis to tell us, what the impact would be, where the sweet spots are, and where the borderlines are. Once you go past this point, you're going to have to start talking about added infrastructure services and added infrastructure cost, or, things like that. So it's something that we're conscious of, but it'll also be in a way market dictated. If a developer comes in and is proposing a development that's going to exceed the capacity of a pump station, then the sewer district is going to say, you need to provide us a new pump station. And that's going to be a cost that you're going to have to add to the pro forma, or you're going to have to bear that cost in some way. And that'll make a difference to the developer, who will say, well, now that added cost is in here, I'm not going to be able to do this project. I didn't realize that we were bumping up against the limits of infrastructure. So it's part of the issue for that. And some of the town services with regard to like police, fire, and those kinds of things, I would rely on Peter's opinion of that. And because I'm not really sure I know where they're at right now with the getting close to that limit, and what types of development would impose additional costs.
The other one that comes to mind for me is stormwater. I think we do need to be mindful. We have some pretty impaired drainages in the center of town, and I think any changes that we do make to promote development in town should definitely, I know Adam's probably not here tonight, but if he were, he would probably jump in and say something.
Adam is here. Adam is here tonight. I see him in the audience, excellent. And he and I also talked about this, and he and I had a conversation about this. And I one of the things I told him is that any project that gets proposed in the downtown my standard disclosure is we need stormwater improvements, and
Yeah.
you know,
No,
that
I
can
think that
be,
should probably be incorporated in zoning to the change. You know, we need more better oversight there. But again, I think part of my point here is that it doesn't have to do with density. It has to do with lot coverage, but it doesn't have to do with
That's
density
exactly right.
per acre. So I think if we, again, I personally am in favor of just, eliminating the density requirement. But
yeah, I did not want to touch the impervious coverage, requirements and limits and regulations on downtown for exactly that reason. That's why that's not any of the proposed change, which is another thing that will control, even without dwelling units per land area changes. If you make that 0, the impervious coverage will be another thing that controls the actual density you're allowed on a lot without having any, land area per dwelling unit restriction.
Yeah, Sam, that's a good point. And what I'm excited about here, the potential is that we can be providing some additional housing value, et cetera, and maybe not adding new impervious area. There's opportunities if we're going another story on Main Street above a storefront, or replacing underutilized parking lot with a roof for a condo building or apartment building. And I think that's a win. So I'm not saying new impervious won't happen. There could be some undeveloped lots or some locations where it would, but there's a great opportunity to do some good things in terms of stormwater by going a different direction. I'd rather have a roof than a parking lot, for example. If Adam would say that.
I was just going to say a parking lot is about as bad as it gets, unless it's perfectly managed. I think it's so, yeah.
So there could be some positive outcome there.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Sam, Adam did offer to comment on stormwater tonight because there are some DEP changes on the horizon. Do you want to briefly hear from him at this point?
Sure. Yeah, it seems like we're talking about it. So yeah, if there are changes that are pertinent to this conversation, I think definitely.
Adam, we're going to put you on the spot. Do you want to give us a brief update on stormwater, how it might pertain to the conversation, and what maybe the board should keep in their mind as if they decide to consider some of the ideas brought forward?
He's muted right now.
Yeah, you just need to unmute Adam. Okay, Adam, it looks like you're unmuted.
It's like Adam is channeling my audio woes of. Well, Adam, feel free to jump in if you get your audio working. I would certainly welcome your input. Other thoughts from the board on I guess just briefly, I see the approach here of tackling some of these changes, assuming that others on the board are open to them. Some of these changes, as soon as next month, maybe we can have more discussion or even a public hearing on a couple of these changes if people are open to that, and then tackling the design side of it and some of these bigger changes in the working group, and hopefully getting that jump started again. Does that make sense to other members of the board? Is there opposition or other questions? What's the feeling?
I agree.
Was that Anna? Sorry, jumping around.
Yeah, Anna, I agree.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, this is Greg. I would agree as well.
Any opposition to changing density requirements or looking at that? It is something, it's something we've sort of batted around in the past.
No, Sam, I'll jump in. I really like this topic. I remember the board discussing the parking lot overlay districts a year ago and being disappointed that it got derailed, so to speak. And I think it was over design standards. So to me, this topic is a more broad approach to the same thing. And but I liked the FEDC presentation. I think Keith did a great job explaining the business and reality aspects of these contemplated changes. I I'd be in favor of exploring the pluses and negatives of all four of the recommended ordinance changes that Keith presented, the density, the height, and the other two as well.
So
I know
Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, go
sorry.
ahead. Oh, I was just going to say one thing that occurred to me in the height discussion is, Keith, you mentioned the fact that we have that steep drop from Main Street, and one of the things that's been driving the building height is not wanting to feel like new construction is imposing over downtown. I mean, if we set an absolute elevation as as opposed to a number of stories, what if we said, all right, 3 stories over Main Street, it's, I don't know, 700 feet above sea level. Nothing can be taller than that. I mean, is that the sort of height approach that you might achieve the goal of allowing taller buildings and providing a specific standard and being clear?
That's a very interesting solution. I've never heard of it being done that way before, because typically from an urban design standpoint, you're looking at rhythmic continuity between the buildings kind of regardless of elevation changes. So I wonder if there was an urban designer in the room, maybe Dan might be, and Caroline probably the closest things to that, I suppose. But I think that they prefer to say, rhythmic continuity by regulating feet above street level, or stories above street level. But I'm curious about how that might work.
Yeah, or
out.
somehow kind of some sort of compromise approach, which I think is actually what we were going for when we talked about the parking lot overlay district. There were 2 different zones, and one of them had a higher max building height, I think, which was the lower zone. And I don't know. I guess my point is not necessarily that we want. I could see sort of like the town getting like a Bart Simpson kind of look to it, where everything is the same. And I mean, I don't think that's likely in the short term, and maybe not even in the long term. And I certainly, I don't think that wouldn't be a good look. But I guess maybe some compromise where we're allowing for some taller buildings in parts of town where it is not impacting the feel of the downtown quite so dramatically. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, I'd be interested in public feedback on that. I'd be interested in public feedback on all of this, which, if that's kind of where the board is going, what I think the best way to drive that would be to have some language for the community to take a look at, related to these, and have a public hearing set for, perhaps do you have a January meeting, or do you take that off and then reconvene in February?
I think we had a January meeting. And also, Caroline, you were going to say something that probably was sort of in line with where Keith and I were going, which is next steps. And you got cut off. So
no, sorry.
Am I right about that?
The downside of Zoom. So I'll say 3 things now that we've had a little more discussion. Sam, I think you're totally correct in your thinking. With the parking lot overlay district, my understanding is that you were looking at allowing a higher building height in the vacant parking lots down on Depot Street and a different height on Main Street. And I think that's something, we can go back and kind of look and see what the thought was there, or some of the discussion, and see if that might, at least be something worth talking about. Number 2, you do have you're popular now. So you have a lot of people here tonight from the public. You have 21 members of the public listening in, and you do have a raised hand. So of course, this is just a discussion. There's no formal language. It's not a public hearing, but if you wanted to take public comment, you could. The other thought, I think, is kind of what you and Keith touched upon. It's good to have something, a little more concrete to react to. I think in particularly in relation to that last slide that Keith presented. So although I think, we all want to see something happen in the village, if you wanted to next month, we could just kind of put like an open community discussion and invite the public to participate then, if you feel like that would be a more helpful approach. Or you could take some comment tonight and figure out what you want to do for next month. But yes, you guys have a lot to do. We have some other big projects still on your plate, which we'll talk about under the next item. So I was anticipating that on the first Wednesday in January, we would all be meeting via Zoom.
just had a quick comment, if you don't mind, Sam, on the height thing. Caroline, you triggered a example or two for me on you can regulate height based on the street that you kind of address. That's one way. If there is a big concern about Main Street versus other streets, I've seen that done successfully. I like the idea of sea level. That would probably keep the surveyors in town and busy and figuring out
Doesn't
how that
Washington
works.
D.C. in Washington D.C. can't you? Nothing can be taller than the Washington Monument. Am I right about that?
I think there's like a
I think that's
8-story
I think
limit
that's the
for the
absolute
entire city. Yeah, the monuments all are taller than all private development. So, yeah, is that L Bean in Freeport? I don't know, but so just an idea in terms of regulating height based on the street you address could be a way to manage that. I'll stop there.
So Caroline, if we did take public comment tonight, we would open it. This is a process question. We would open it to whomever wanted to speak, and then could we do the same thing we did last month and kind of limit it to 2 minutes? So that's reasonable.
It's not a public hearing, so you don't have to like open and close it. But yeah, you could, I think, invite them to speak. Just ask if they have thoughts pertaining to this. They, limit it to 2 minutes.
Before we do that, I would certainly do a sort of non-official straw vote, but a poll of the board to see if people are open to that idea. It makes sense to me just because I do see a possibility for going to a public hearing pretty quickly with some of these things, given that we have other things to do, and it seems like this has broad board support, and there's some sort of common sense, or at least in my view, common sense things that we could do to promote development downtown, which I think, I guess it does sort of tie back to the KV Enterprises discussion a little bit too. I think we saw how much opposition there was to a development of that nature. I would be very interested to see how the residents of Freeport feel about development in the downtown area. I think it's in my mind, again, it's a part of town that's better suited to, to these sorts of higher density developments. And I think it would achieve a lot of goals at once. And it also, it's unlikely that we're going to end up with like 1,000 units downtown overnight. So I think it would, I think there's a lot of upside here. So how does the board feel about taking 2 minutes per public comment?
Sure.
Good.
Yes.
Any objection? All right, great. So members of the public who are kind enough to be spending your Wednesday evenings with us, if you would like to comment, please respectfully keep your comments to 2 minutes or so, and raise your hand and we will invite you in.
I'm going to bring over Stephanie first. She's our patient hand raised person. Okay, Stephanie, you can unmute.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I'm Stephanie Millette, and in public hearing format, I live at 2 Hummingbird Lane downtown. As not only a downtown resident of Freeport, but a former manager of the largest real estate asset in the state, the Maine Mall, I'm thrilled you're looking at the work and play style approach to downtown, something that will actually, I think, keep the surviving retailers alive. I've been in touch with the BD people down at the mall and just love the approach that they're looking at, the city's looking at, and that we're taking the same direction, I think is visionary. That property has seen a lot, as all retail properties have. And so just thinking as a resident and someone who wants our community to stay alive, I love this direction. In addition to the physical and financial considerations of stakeholders, it sounds like you've also talked about the people aspect and the audiences that might serve as residences and the impact that they would have on the community and the aspect of that downtown vibe. I think deliberate selection of the communities that you bring in helps create the vibe of downtown, the environment that then the rest of folks will want to come also join the party that's happening down there, and keep the tourism going. So I wondered if you'd considered intentional community scopes, you know, an environmental pod, a maker space with artists and residents, that kind of intentional community aspect with a targeted audience. I'd written a letter to the planning board that I should have directed to you folks, actually, Keith, about a model being used in several communities, including Metro West Boston, that has multi-family rental units for foster families, interestingly enough. I learned about it because I'm a weekend foster mom. But it also has elders, and the funding model that they've gotten has been awesome. They've gotten external partners. And I know other, you know, if we used veterans or artists or whoever it was that we kind of targeted with a couple small developments mixed in with the general plan, we might be able to create a sense of place and notability for us that would keep Freeport as kind of the destination while also building in that residential stuff. So that was just kind of I was curious because I'm positive I'm not the first person that's thought of this. So I wondered if you guys had that kind of the human kind of considerations already.
Yeah, no, thank you. I would love to actually talk to you about more of that. And especially with the things you're hearing from the CV people further downstate and that idea. So yeah, that's very interesting. And I'd like to just, she went dark, but I'd like to introduce Nikki Yannick, who is also a member of my board and who's here with us tonight. And Nikki is, I think, part of that demographic you're talking about, Stephanie, is somebody who grew up in the area, but chose to come back to Maine. And you know, Nikki, I wonder if you could talk a little bit to that and the people aspect of what we can attract to downtown.
Absolutely. So, hi, everybody. My name is Nikki Schneider, and I live in the Elm Street neighborhood right behind LL Bean. I'm 31 years old. I live with my husband and my dog, and I have the millennial dream of leaving Maine and coming home and working here now. And one of the things that attracted myself and my husband to Freeport was the walkability factor, something that Portland couldn't offer, Yarmouth couldn't offer, Brunswick really couldn't offer in the same way that Freeport could. And also because I was born and raised in Brunswick, I didn't want to live that close to home. But my husband is from Washington, D.C., and really wanted that kind of more urban vibe, which I'm sure doesn't really come to mind when you think of Freeport. But in our minds, just being able to walk for a cup of coffee or to go get dinner or a drink was really important. And I've talked to a lot of my friends, both who grew up here and who didn't, who really are looking for that kind of place to live. They have been priced out of Portland. Portland also doesn't offer the same kind of amenities that Freeport does. And so for us, Freeport was the perfect place. And, you know, I grew up I worked at Clark's for a very, very long time. I was a yoga teacher with Freeport Yoga Company. And so we really decided to put roots down in this community in a way that we couldn't elsewhere. And I think that what a lot of people, myself included, and I don't want to speak, for, an entire generation or demographic, but we are really looking for more experiential offerings in a town that retail doesn't really offer, but going out to Mean Beer Company or Bucks Naked Barbecue, or being able to walk downtown for the Sparkle celebration, which we're very excited about, or any of the holidays. We always do the fun run for the 4K. So I think the 4th of July, excuse me. So I think what Freeport offers is really kind of light years ahead of where a lot of people think it is, but it also offers a lot of challenges, because we were incredibly lucky to be able to live downtown, and we're only able to do so because we knew somebody who was going to sell their home before it hit the market. Otherwise, it never would have happened. And I know Leanne can talk more about this than I can, but one of the biggest challenges we are seeing now is we can't go anywhere. We can't go on to a bigger home or look for another home because we just don't see that opportunity. It's just not there's just no inventory. It's not going to happen. There's no turnover either. So there's no way we feel like we were completely lucky, and just, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity to be able to move here. But I know so many people who currently live in Portland and are renting, or would love to be able to have an opportunity to kind of have the best of both worlds, have a small town, have a semi-urban experience, and still have the ability to be outside and on trails and really take advantage of everything else that Freeport has to offer. But it's probably not going to happen for 99% of the people who really want that, at least the way things stand right now.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki.
Perspective there, Nikki. I think, yeah, I think that's, hopefully with some of these changes, we can at least start to get on the right track to making that available to more people at a better, just making it more available. And I think it's, to me, this kind of development would serve both the town and its potential future residents better than hundreds of units over by the golf course. Sorry to anybody from KV Enterprises who's watching right now, but all right, other members of the public who wish to comment? I can't really see the panelists view very easily.
Peter wanted to comment, our town manager.
Yes.
Hi,
Peter?
Sam.
Who am I to
Mr.
refuse
Chair,
that?
members of the board. Hey, I was sorry, I'm in my kitchen here. I was grilling up some chicken when I heard with the speaker on, when I heard Mr. McBride summon me earlier. I didn't want to jump in, but just to answer the question for the board, since I may not be at your future meetings, I would agree with what had been said. The primary concerns for high density development in the downtown area, draw on town services, I would say would be police and fire and schools. Direct service needs, the water and sewer infrastructure, obviously those are separate, but those would be demands as well. I don't think any development would have no impact, right? So there would be marginal impacts on all of our administrative departments, everything from my office, town clerk, Caroline's work in the town hall. There wouldn't be a huge public infrastructure demand though, in terms of public works, transportation, things like that. So I think the big three would be police, fire, specifically ambulance, demand, and school demands. So that's what I would say to consider. Love the conversation and love hearing everybody. So thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, next up we have Kate.
Hi, this is actually not Kate Olson. This is her husband, Matt Cheney. So I certainly don't want to speak for Kate. My question for the board pertains mostly to FEDC and the KV Enterprises proposal. My understanding from review of prior planning board minutes was that KV Enterprises had approached FEDC at some point and sort of floated the idea of that development toward them. And FEDC had given them a green light, if you will, or a positive initial impression. And what I'm hearing tonight from FEDC seems to be fairly different from the spirit of the KV Enterprises development. And I'm having a difficult time understanding how FEDC could be agreeable to a project like that and say the things that are being said tonight. And I don't know how we can have assurances that FEDC is acting in the interest of the people of Freeport and not simply the economic interest, a perceived economic interest, if that makes sense, as we're thinking about future development.
Well, I would say we are acting in an economic interest. That's the economic development interests and the goals of the town. As it relates to the KV Enterprises project, we received a presentation of what that project was going to be right around the same time that the public was hearing about it. And our response to it was that we support residential development in a general level, but did not take a position to support that project, and did not comment on it when it came in front of the planning board here. But we recognize, and Leanne I know has spoken to this and could speak to it again, the lack of housing availability. But as it related to that project and individual projects in general, again, retroactive and reactive planning is not the way to do it. We're trying to be proactive and try to capture what the community's best idea is. And we listened to that conversation quite a bit, and it's driving a lot of the conclusions we came to on this. So I don't know where the conclusion came up that we were somehow big supporters and drivers of that project. That's really not the case. We had a presentation on what it was going to be and took that information in as a board, as advisory to us, like this is happening and this is something that's going to be proposed, but certainly weren't the main proponents of it or drivers or primary advocates for seeing that it got done. We were simply interested in it, as I think the rest of the community was. I think that the recommendations you're seeing tonight are coming from a lot of the feedback we've gotten from the community, and that includes residential community, from the business community, from our own exploration and our own focus that what is in the best interests of downtown from an economic development standpoint is a focus on downtown. And we believe very strongly that this and a number of the other efforts that we're undergoing towards downtown get us towards a direction and a vision that is positive for the entire town, not for any one segment and not for any other interests other than the community's development and the community's best interest for quality of life, balancing the tax base. And again, I mentioned it before, and I'll say it again, we're undergoing or preparing to undergo a lengthy strategic planning, I shouldn't say lengthy, I should say in-depth strategic planning process. And please, I encourage you to come out and have an opinion and give that opinion on where the community should be going from a development standpoint. We need those opinions and we welcome them. So I guess, as members of my board, Dan and Nikki and Leanne, I invite you to speak to that as well. And I also know that my board president, Mary Davis, is in the audience, and she is also one of the primary drivers of that strategic initiative. And Mary, if you do feel like you want to pop in, I'd encourage you to use the raise hand function and see if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
I guess this is Leanne again. I guess what I would like to say is this conversation we're having tonight is a conversation that we started when I very first joined the board to really look at sort of what is happening in the retail sector and in our downtown. So this is not a brand new conversation for us. The KB Enterprises presentation was just simply that. It was a presentation. We looked at it and it sort of evolved the way that it evolved within the community. So this is something we've been working on actually pretty hard with a lot of our volunteer time for 2 years. So this is not a new discussion that we're having tonight. And it really doesn't have anything to do with the KB Enterprises discussion, in my opinion.
I'd like to second what Leanne said. This is Nikki again. I'm actually a very recent addition to the board, but for the last 2 years, I've just been sitting in because I had an interest. They're all public meetings, and Keith invited me to sit and listen and learn from everybody. And everything that's I've been just kind of a fly on the wall for over the last few years is really a hard, comprehensive look at the town and its needs as a whole, as a very holistic approach. And for me, that was really encouraging and one of the things that made me want to officially join the board. And the KB Enterprises thing kind of came up relatively recently and much later in the conversation. And I think that the intention from my perspective was simply that, this is something that we can't just wave a wand and say, this lot is going to be 5 units and this lot's going to be 2 units. Like, we can't do that. But we can simply say, yes, we're in favor of some development in the area, some fresh faces. We need people on the streets. We need people in our stores. We need economic momentum in our town, but we do not have the power to simply dictate exactly how that's going to go. Ultimately, somebody else has to make that decision and make that move.
And I'll add really quickly too, one of the takeaways we had from that presentation was, geez, we really need to have a better understanding of how development impacts a lot of the public services that we were just talking about with Peter, town, fire, police, sewer, schools, all those things. We need to have data on this. We need to have metrics. And that's, kind of why we have that other matter kind of progressing with hopefully getting that type of analysis. I do see Mary with her hand up. Sam, I don't know if it's inappropriate, but I know that this is an issue that she's been working on and driving on behalf of the board. So if it would be appropriate for her to kind of speak to that question as well, I think I would appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
So you do have a line. Do you want to have Mary comment on this? Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, I think in the interest of continuity of the discussion, we can have Mary jump the line if that's
okay.
That's all right.
Mary, you're live.
Thank you. I appreciate, this is Mary Davis. I am president of FEDC, and I appreciate your concern about listening to people in the town of Freeport. So there's two things that I would say on this is FEDC gets a lot of concepts and ideas that comes in front of our board. And the one thing that we know to be true is that we believe in the town process, the planning board process, the bringing projects to Freeport always goes through a public process. And we absolutely believe in that. And a lot of the role that we play to these builders is saying to them, here's how you go through that process. Here's the things for you to do. We don't try to speak for the community because that's what the process already does such a wonderful, wonderful job of. So we don't try to get in front of that. And we aren't the yes or no people of projects that come into Freeport. There's other, again, the council, the planning board, all you folks do that really well. So, you know, are we listening to the people of Freeport? Yes, we're about to launch, and you probably heard it, a process of looking at downtown. What do we want in downtown? And that will include input from all constituencies, residents, the boards, businesses, because we want input for what do you want the downtown to look like so that we can help to take actions in alignment with that. So understand your angst about that housing. But again, I feel like the process worked. The town and folks had an opportunity to give their feedback. And I think that was good democratic process and work. So happy to talk to you anytime you want to call me directly. I'm signed off.
Yeah, in fact, the public really jumped in on that one even ahead of the traditional public process, which I think was good. Yeah, we never even had to hold a public hearing on that because I think the message got through loud and clear. So I think the only thing that I want to add just to that discussion, and it's not something that Matt specifically asked, but I just want to make sure that, and I said I think in the last KV Enterprises meeting too, but that, and the you know, that was something that came from KV Enterprises. It was not, you know, it's the planning board didn't go out looking for it. FEDC didn't go out looking for it. It was, you know, and anyone with a right or interest in land or whatever it is in Freeport has a right to come before the board and make a proposal for a change, and that's exactly what happened. So all right, back to the queue.
Okay, so next up we have Valley, and after Valley will be Catherine. All right, Valley, you're up.
Hi, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I am fully in favor of all these changes to basically promote development in the downtown and mixed use and residential. And based on all the conversations that were happening in town during the time of the KV application, I can vouch for large numbers of people who feel this way and who are very supportive of developing high density mixed use in the downtown. And I had a question about parking requirements. In prior conversations at this board and the town council level, there has always, there have frequently been concerns about the parking requirements and the fact that when change of use of old buildings, when they're being repurposed, triggers that parking requirement, it adds cost to projects and may hinder development in the downtown because there's so many old buildings that are grandfathered that are not required to provide the parking, but they would be if they were to go through that process of changing use. So Keith, can you speak to that and maybe highlight why this hasn't been one of the suggestions or recommendations from the board?
Yeah, and I would ask Caroline to speak to that as well. I mean, the parking changes that were made, I think, addressed a lot of that. You know, there have been reductions on the parking requirement for residential uses for, I think, a lot exactly this reason, to try to help encourage and to encourage the redevelopment of existing spaces into new residential. Part of the reason I think that we did not propose any changes to parking as a part of this is because I don't think we've seen the full impact of those changes yet. And we haven't seen the full impact of what parking is going to, especially haven't seen the full impact of those changes outside of the impact of COVID, which of course drastically reduced the amount of parking we needed in downtown for 2020. But in speaking with Caroline, it was one of the things that we touched on and said, maybe this is something that we, you know, it would make a difference. Don't get me wrong. I think if we were to take the parking requirement for residential down to, almost nothing because it's pretty low as it sits now, but to take it down even further, would that have an impact? Sure. But is that the right move? And what type of a, trying to avoid the potential of overdoing it with parking limitations, especially since we haven't seen the full impact of where we are with parking requirements in light of those changes. But Caroline, tell me if I'm off with those comments. But I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, I agree with you on that comment. So the parking changes were done a couple years ago. We talked about them as a board and as a community for quite some time. As part of that, the parking requirement for all uses in the village was lowered. As part of the process, property owners or businesses could look to come in to get a parking recalculation. So if they get a parking recalculation and the requirement goes down, they could have excess parking. If they have excess parking, they have a few options. They could put it in the leased parking pool in case somebody else comes in to do a project and they need parking. Or if they have a whole lot of vacant, meaning a actual physical parking lot of vacant parking, they could choose to sell it or do something else because they don't need it anymore. We still have parking recalculation requests trickling in. I will say, I thought, people would be pounding on the town hall door on the first day, but that actually wasn't the case. People have been pretty cautious. I have 3 parking recalculations I'm actually considering right now based upon information the applicant submitted. So I think Keith's right. We don't know the full impact of how much extra parking we're going to have from the changes at this point. And then in addition with COVID. So I think, if we aren't hearing from developers at this point that this is one of the huge obstacles, I think it would be good to see the impact of the previously made changes and how they work out on the village. If we find they're a hurdle to development, then as a board, that could be something that the planning board decides to take up proactively, but I don't think we've seen the full impacts yet.
The other part of this, Caroline, you know a lot more about this than I do, but if my memory serves me correctly, when this board recommended to the council the changes to the parking requirements, we recommended that they end the grandfathering as part of that. And the idea was that we tried to balance out the reduction with requiring some extra parking and make it more equitable. We sent it to the council and the council actually declined to enact that portion of our recommendation. So the grandfathering portion is still in effect. So if there's a change, that do I have that right, Caroline, that the grandfathering still exists in town?
It does exist. However, people will have to come into conformity sooner. And sadly, with some of the long-term vacancies we've seen going on, some of the people that have been non-conforming, if they come in to do something, if they have had a space that's vacant for 12 or greater months, they are going to have to come into conformity. I would assume that the parking requirement for a multifamily project is going to be less for something than retail, especially if they don't have a ton of bedrooms, because that's how we calculate it. We don't go off total square footage of apartment like we do for other uses. We would go off the number of bedrooms. That makes sense.
And one of the other changes that did also go into effect is that even though they declined to remove the grandfathering, is that they changed the requirement for the expiration of grandfathering if a space has been vacant for more than 12 months instead of 18. So in a lot of cases, when we're looking at properties where landlords are willing to try to redevelop vacant space into residential, they've already been vacant for the requisite 12 months. So in those cases, grandfathering would have expired anyway. So I also neglected to say thank you to Valley for those comments and for support of this of the downtown concept. I really appreciate that. But parking is still a kind of a question mark, and I don't think we've seen how it fully plays out. I'd love to, try to do something, but I worry about the impacts of taking the parking requirements down even further because we haven't seen the impacts of pretty dramatic changes that took place last year.
Yeah, I think that's also a separate discussion because it relates more to retail than it does to residential, which is mostly what we're focused on here. So, thanks for that comment. Next
Next up, you have Catherine. Catherine, you're over. You can unmute.
Am I up there? There I am. Hi, it's Kathy, actually. It's Catherine, only on Zoom. Kathy Bieberstein, and I live on Flying Point. I'm also on the board of the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Freeport and Freeport Conservation Trust, but I'm speaking just for myself this evening. I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for all the work you're doing. And I know you've been working on this for a while, and that COVID has put some wrinkles in it. And Keith, I know your FEDC has been really putting time in it too. I think that it's one of those COVID byproducts that probably we're going to reflect on in a couple of years, that there seems to be a laser focus in town of so many groups thinking about revitalizing and reimagining downtown Freeport. You hear about it at Bow Street, you hear about it everywhere. Everyone's talking about it, which is fantastic. And they're not, I think, not just talking about it, people are doing things. So Arts and Cultural Alliance of Freeport, we're building a theater and gallery, the complete streets, people are talking about the outdoor trails and recreation. They're all chomping at the bit and talking about this new comprehensive plan that I know you're also going to be talking about. And having a comprehensive plan, and you hear people use that word almost like the holy grail. Like, so when we get our new comprehensive plan, and I think you heard that at the last planning board meeting when we were talking about the KB project, we need to have a new comprehensive plan for Freeport. So what I'm kind of advocating for here is that there are individual groups already taking major steps, and some of them are pretty big, like the theater and gallery space on Main Street. It's just going to be so important to coordinate and communicate with these groups, because a lot of people are kind of saying, I'm not sure what we're doing. There's the comprehensive plan, what's going to happen. So, and I know that this evening I've been going over the website as you guys have been talking, looking for different information. It may be something we all have to think about, how we communicate with townspeople, and especially these groups that are working in tandem with you in a new and different way, and how you get feedback in a new and different way, that it's crisp and clear, so that there aren't gaps and people not understanding what's going on. And I wish I could say, and here's the solution, but I don't have it. But I do think that communication and coordination is just going to be such an important part of this process. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy, for bringing that up. It's definitely been something I've been thinking about throughout this conversation, is the fact that there is this comprehensive plan sort of looming on the horizon, and it came up as part of the KB Enterprises discussion. And it's been something, well, it's come up many times over the last couple of years. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think your point's taken. And I think that with FEDC, and we shouldn't have this conversation tonight, but with FEDC looking at the downtown and a plan for the downtown, I think there's going to be some overlap in the work that goes into the comp plan and the work that goes into that plan. And we should definitely make sure that we're using our resources wisely there, so we're not duplicating efforts, or like Kathy suggested too, also we're not missing things that should be accounted for. So yeah, points very well taken, Kathy. Thanks for that. Next
up is Gorms 4. You've been moved over. You can unmute and share your comments.
Hi, I'm Melissa Gormley. I live out over on Webster Road. I just following up on Nicole's comment from earlier, because they relocated here because they wanted that walkable experience, but they weren't able to find it in Portland. And so I love all this conversation tonight about revitalizing the downtown, and I am really convinced that when you build it, they will come, and it's going to be the same story all over again, that young people, I think Freeport, if all of these changes come sort of to fruition, it's going to continue to be a very attractive place, and that's going to kind of perpetuate itself. So the young Nickies of the future aren't going to be able to relocate into Freeport in 10 or 15 years. So I just wonder, as we sort of think this through, about some ways to sort of build in opportunities for low and mid income. I mean, we've seen this happen in communities all over the country, where they're sort of trending and they're lovely and people want to be there. And so everyone gets priced out of it eventually. So I think, you know, Freeport will change. It's very desirable. And it's just a matter of economics before it's no longer going to be affordable for these young people that we're trying to create affordable places for, so that they can stay here because they grew up here. So just another consideration to plug into the thinking here. And that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about different ways to incorporate affordability requirements or guidelines in the zoning. It's a tricky one. I don't think we've come up with any good solutions at this point.
Can I convert that comment into a question for Keith? So namely, in your discussions with potential developers, have any of them mentioned the affordability component?
Affordability kind of has different meanings. In some cases, you know, it means, you know, what constitutes housing that the workforce can afford, and other times it means, you know, that type of housing that is already being provided in pretty good amounts by like the Freeport Housing Trust. So many of them are looking at, and actually this is a great something that Leanne is very passionate about, and I know that she's chimed in on in other conversations, but there is a focus on this middle market, right, that can't afford the $500,000 single family homes that are out there. And again, there's no houses, there's 4 houses on the market, and I don't know what price points they're at, but I'd be willing to bet that they don't span a lot of the affordability demographic that we're talking about. So I think that there are a lot of conversations about targeting that middle market, the workforce housing aspect, the people who can't afford those single family homes, but don't qualify for, you know, the rent control and price adjusted and price controlled homes. Because there's a market there. There are people who are interested in being here, and they're priced out of so much of the existing housing stock in Freeport. I do not hear a lot of talk about, except from the Housing Trust, who is very interested in expanding their portfolio. I do not hear a lot about, you know, the rent control type of affordable housing and Section 8 and that sort of stuff. Mostly it's targeting that middle market, which they feel they can do with denser housing.
Keith, when you, in my experience looking at pro formas, the higher end market has a higher rate of return. And so when you've been talking to these 8 developers, do you know what kind of property types there? Is it high-end residential? Is it this middle ground that you're talking about? Or what are they looking to develop?
I don't think that any of them have been at a point where they're talking about specific price points for units and saying, I'm targeting, you know, higher end housing, or I'm targeting, you know, there's been talk about the demand that exists. And that's, you know, kind of my response to Wayne's question had to do more with, you know, what the demand is that they're seeing. So I don't think I can really answer that, because I have not heard those discussions specifically about pricing. And a lot of that is also going to depend on the cost to build, right? Because you're going to price your housing units. If you're selling condos, for example, you're going to price your units so that, you know, it covers the cost of construction, and the cost of construction drives a lot of what you see as the cost of the unit, the price of a unit. So without having a specific development proposal in front of us that, you know, where somebody's gone through the soft costs and the design aspects and priced out construction, I don't think even a developer would be able to give with great specificity what their exact price points are. I don't know if Leanne wants to jump in on that. She's so much more knowledgeable about the market than I am, and I would much rely on her.
Just my very unofficial data from a quick Zillow survey there. While I listened to you there, Keith, there are actually only 3 that show up on Zillow, and the cheapest is $529.
Leanne, did you just sell a house? Did you just sell a house while we were on this call?
So there's four, and you're right.
Yeah, no, I
529
believe
is the cheapest and the highest is 745. So there were two others in the sixes, and that's at the moment, and unless you get the density, it's harder to, on the 2.5 acre lots, it's harder to get the cost down. But we do have a very robust Freeport Housing Trust, as Keith mentioned, and they're doing some really great things in downtown. But having that additional population in downtown, does serve and help the businesses. So, there's a lot of benefit to this, and I'm really grateful that everyone's had such a positive, sort of approach to this discussion. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think as somebody, I work in the residential construction world, and cost of building is really high right now, in particular in Maine, and we have out-of-state clients who come in and are blown away, not usually in a good way, by the square foot cost of construction here. I mean, it's high in other parts of the country too, but Maine definitely, we have high labor costs, and it's an expensive time to build. Materials costs have been high too. So I think it just comes back to the fact that density and the building height are really two important things, because you only have to build one building shell. So if you can make it a little bit bigger, the marginal cost there is much smaller than building single family homes. So yeah, I think I would certainly be supportive of attempts to target that part of the housing market that is more accessible to more people. So I think we should keep that in mind going forward. Caroline, next comment.
So Melissa was our last hand. Do any other members of the public wish to comment on this item tonight? If you do so, please raise your hand and we'll bring you over. I am not seeing anyone else that wishes to comment tonight.
Great.
Sam.
Yeah, that's great. I think, yeah, thanks to all the people who were able to comment. Really, I think good to get a little bit of public input, even at this early stage, or perhaps especially at this early stage, to guide the next step. So I think, from my perspective here, the next steps are maybe to look at some potential language for how to change the VC density, building height requirements, and other changes that Keith proposed. I don't know. I feel like the impacts to public services are going to be so project specific. I don't know where that data comes from, as far as, well, if you build, if you have 15 bedrooms, that's equivalent to 1% of a fire truck or something. I don't know how that data shakes out or where it comes from, but I think it would be helpful to have some of that data for for public and for planning purposes. Keith, have you?
I do have one question related to that. There were several references to the number of bedrooms being highly related to the burden on the schools, for example. And I was just wondering, first of all, is it feasible to limit the number of bedrooms, say no more than 2 bedrooms? And what would be the legal mechanism for doing that?
I think, so I'm trying to think if isn't there an existing bit of language in one of the, I'm trying to remember where it is. I think it's in the subdivision, village mixed use subdivision or something, some village subdivision ordinance that says that if there are more than a certain number of dwelling units on a certain acreage, then at least one of them has to be smaller than 1,500 square feet or something. It's something like that. Caroline, am I? And it specifically says in the ordinance, it says, and the idea behind this is to promote a variety of housing units at a range of prices. So there must be some sort of way to build that kind of thing in.
I think what you're thinking about, I think it might be, I'm not sure every zone, but I think it's like in the village zone, and it was for allowing a lower land per dwelling unit requirement in existing buildings. Maybe, and they could take advantage of it, but to take advantage of it, they had to have an efficiency unit. But yeah, I think that's something that we can kind of look at and see if it's something that at least is worth talking about.
So Carolyn, in your experience, have you seen bedroom limitations either here or elsewhere?
I haven't seen bedroom limitations. I mean, I think it would be hard from an enforcement perspective. I know that, you know, a lot of people that come in here, I see a lot of 3-bedroom septic designs, but I'm pretty sure if we go to a lot of houses, they're not all 3 bedrooms. So I do think it could be a challenge. You know, people don't always invite people into their homes to check out bedrooms and stuff like that. So anytime we have a standard that like we can't really follow up and enforce, I don't necessarily think that's the best approach. Although, you know, I thought Dan made some good comments about their analysis and, you know, the impacts based upon the number of bedrooms. But I think it's something that we can definitely look into in the meantime before, you know, your next meeting.
I'll quickly add, I mean, you know, to the question of that data, Sam, I don't know the answers to those questions either, but that's why we're trying to reach out to somebody who's done this type of analysis before. And even if it can be on a looser basis of saying, okay, let's just, you know, on a generic proposal, you're looking at a range of X number of costs to, you know, X percentage of a fire truck or whatever it is. If there's a way to do that analysis and bring it forward so that it can help the planning board, the planning department, you know, to educate the comprehensive plan process to help them target a growth rate or a growth number so that we know, you know, we're going to grow. We need to figure out, you know, what our targets are, those kinds of things. I'm hopeful that that's what that information can help us out with. I don't know if it's possible either, but I'm hopeful. Secondly, I would just say too, I don't know if those restrictions are possible as far as like by bedrooms, but you know, we do want to stay family friendly as well. You know, we value the, you know, being a place where families can come and grow and not, you know, not just kind of be a stepping stone bedroom community for people who are looking to land elsewhere. So it's a delicate balance, and I don't know if that's, you know, from a standpoint of being legal or allowed, if that's feasible, but I worry about other potential impacts of what we're saying to the community and to other people about, you know, the type of community we're trying to build. We have to balance that with the impact to the school, obviously.
Right. I don't disagree with that, but it was the number of bedrooms was raised a number of times as the thing that would control the burden on the schools. And if you can't really regulate that, then you really don't have that protection against burdening the schools. So you have to deal with the reality of it.
Yeah, it's a
It'd be impossible to enforce, you know, because you could really, the definition of a bedroom is it has a closet. So you could just develop large rooms, you know, I mean, that would be really hard, I think.
Or have an agreement with a particular developer who, if you're talking about, you know, many units, they could be constructing units that don't accommodate more than 2 bedrooms if that was your goal, or 3 bedrooms, whatever it would be. So you know, it would be inherent in the nature of construction. I'm not really talking about an existing home where people could add extra bedrooms. It would be the nature of the development that could be addressed by the developer.
Yeah, I think they're. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Oh, no, I was just going to clarify that what you were referencing before, that strategy for like kind of a small efficiency, the purpose of that was really to encourage some small units that would thereby be affordable. Right.
And yeah, I think that so that approach already exists in town. It's not by limiting bedrooms, but it's by limiting overall size of the dwelling unit, and which, I mean, effectively, you know, unless you want 3, you know, I don't know what's a tiny bedroom, 60 square foot bedrooms. You know, if you say we're limiting a certain number of these units to 1,200 square feet or 1,000 square feet, then, you know, you're effectively putting not a strict limit, but a sort of practical limit on the number of bedrooms that can be squeezed in there and still meet market demands. So I think we can probably get there if that continues to be, or if it seems to make sense to pursue that as a, you know, way of regulating or limiting or achieving certain goals. So I think, yeah, so for next month, does it make sense to look at language? Are there other specific things that members of the board would like to see back from town staff as far as data or language or specific things that should be addressed.
Do we know, Keith, when this study you were referring to, any idea when we'd get some of the data back from that?
I'm expecting end of this week or early next week to have proposals on what could be done and at what price point from this particular consultant. And after that, I'm trying to remember, he did talk about feasibility on getting something done. I think it depends on the scope primarily, but geez, I'm not sure. I wouldn't be able to say, but I know that, my board is anxiously awaiting the proposal on what could be done and at what price points, so we can figure out, what we can pay for and make sure we get enough information for it to be feasible and useful. So I can report back to Caroline and keep her informed on that. I don't know what the board's calendar looks like going forward. If the January meeting is already burdened with a bunch of things to talk about, and I wouldn't want to just stack on top of an already crowded agenda. But I would hope that if we were meeting, January might be short, but if we were going to be meeting in February to talk about this, I'd hope that I would have something at least to share by then, but I can't promise. I would also ask too, having language to look at and having a public hearing on some proposed language would be outstanding. But do you think that language would be VC1 language, or would it be language across multiple VC districts?
I think if we're tackling density and we're tackling building heights, and you have to forgive me, you refresh my memory on the other two hot ticket items there on your slide.
Mixed use, allowing mixed use as a use,
Yep.
and that's specifically VC1. And Sam, you threw me for a loop by naming two of them out of order. Density, building heights, and the mixed use question. I think those were the other two.
And design review.
Design review. Well,
design review. Yeah, that's the big one that I think is kind of, it's not so much off the table as it's off the immediate table, because I think it's just a bigger thing than we're going to tackle just within this board and just in the next few months. So I see the mixed use one as being potentially the easiest one of all. I mean, that to me is a no-brainer. I don't know how other folks feel on that, but it just seems to me that if we're having this discussion about residential in the VC1, yeah, sure, mixed use. I mean, that makes perfect sense. So yeah, what any other thoughts from the board? Caroline, do you feel like we have some direction for the next meeting?
Yeah, I think, if you want some statistics, it sounds like from Keith, January might be aggressive, knowing that, there's a holiday in between, there's a pandemic, a lot of different factors, but I don't see why they couldn't come back to you in workshop with some actual, language to look at what that might look like. I think some of the data, I think, we might be able to pull from different town departments. I guess, it's really up to you guys. Do you want to kind of see what they're thinking in a formal format before you go to public hearings? So you can
I'd like to see language. Yeah, I'd like to see language. And I think if that, Keith, would that come from you and your, or would that be something that town staff would work together on it? Yeah, okay.
So it sounds like we're envisioning making some kind of recommended changes prior to and independently of any particular developer's proposal. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And I think, I mean, I also, this is, I think, a good, we should remember that the process would be, we would see proposed changes, and there would, we would discuss them. We would sort of try to think through the implications of those changes, next month or the month after. Hopefully by that time we have some data, and at that point there would then be a public hearing, and we would get additional input from the public before recommending any changes to the council. So this is still, there's still some things to go through before we all of a sudden change all this stuff about the VC districts. So And I guess I personally would like to see, the mixed use mainly applies to VC1, right? Because that's, where we're talking about residential units on the first floor and those sorts of developments. But then the other ones, yeah, I would certainly be in favor of looking at changing building heights and changing density requirements in all of the VC districts.
To be honest, though, I confess, I don't recall, and I would rely on Caroline for this, if mixed use is an allowed use in the VC 2, 3, and 4. If it is not, it might make sense to add it there as well, just because there seems to be an interest in allowing mixed use in some of those districts. And again, I look forward to a public hearing to have people, tell me that I'm right or wrong about that.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, we had this conversation for a different zone about mixed use, and you guys recommended to the council to amend the definition. So today, mixed use would involve at least one residential unit and then some other use that is permitted in the district. It is kind of allowed in the village, but in a backwards way, because currently in the VC1, it says you can have 1 or 2 units, but it has to be on other than the first floor. So that would imply that residential upstairs, commercial downstairs. I think if you were to change to mixed use, it allows the opportunity for a residential unit on the first floor, but still, something different on the second floor. They could have the office upstairs if they wanted, and residential downstairs. My first thought on, VC2, I was like, oh, I wasn't sure. But actually, I think we have some mixed use, like the Thomas Mosier building. I believe there's some residential units in there and there's some commercial space. So similar to the other situation where you added this use, altered this use for and added it down on Route 1 South, you might actually make some uses conforming, which we always like. So I think it's worth looking at, So VC2 is going to be just north of the village core. So it's going to be like Thomas Mosier, the former Friendlies, Georgetown Potters, some of those are big buildings and they're multi-level. So I think it could create an opportunity for some stuff to happen. Village Commercial 3 is a little bit different because, that's south of the village. It's kind of divided by the railroad bridge. So it has a different level of connectivity. There's more vacant land there, but I would say that seems to be more residential.
Yeah, so I think, again, speaking for me personally here, I don't see a reason not to have mixed use as a permitted use in any of the VC districts. I think it was a different story when 15 years ago, but now I think we seem to be moving in that direction for allowing residential development downtown and recognizing that it has other benefits other than just letting people live downtown. So in terms of promoting business downtown and those other benefits as well.
Okay, so we'll plan on seeing them back in January for a kind of continued discussion, maybe with more formal language that the board can react to. And I'm sure if there's some language out there that you'll probably get some public comment, whether it be in writing or at the meeting if you choose to take public comment.
Yeah, does that seem like a reasonable plan to the board? Any objections? Cool. All right, I think that just about wraps up our discussion, and we have on the agenda tonight, I think, only persons wishing to address the board on non-agenda items. Are there any?
Well, you skipped one thing.
oh, okay. Thank you once again. Don't have it in front of me. Sorry.
Sorry. So I was going to give you an update on future board topics.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Including completing the process for draft solar, updates to shoreline zoning, and the process of beginning updating the comprehensive plan. So kind of pre-pandemic, the board finished the draft of the solar ordinance. We were set to go to public hearing in April, and everything shut down due to COVID. That document has been completed. You had put a lot of time into it. unfortunately, we are still meeting via Zoom, and it doesn't look like we're going to be back in a meeting room with a lot of people close together. So I feel like if you want to go forward, we could move forward with the solar. We could have the public hearing. We have a Zoom capacity of 500 people. You know, part of the issue with the solar is there's a lot of public notification, probably like 3/4 of the town. But that's definitely something the board could take on if they're ready to kind of wrap that project up. That's probably the biggest project you have in the queue. After that, we need to revisit shoreline zoning once we kind of get through the solar. You had a couple smaller discussions already that were all, the next one that was kind of set for public hearing was some talk about increasing public notification, specifically newspaper printing for subdivision and site plan review. I think that's something that's ready to go, although I think it's worth potentially looking at whether or not you want to recommend the same thing for the zoning ordinance amendment. That was a comment that we heard. So you have that project out there. The council had directed you to look at food trucks, which you've had discussion on. We haven't seen the formal language, but we've talked about it. And they did also ask you to look at density and the commercial 3 district, which is Lower Main Street. So those are kind of projects in the queue. I do also know that the ordinance committee is working on some potential changes to the noise ordinance, and they are going to be asking the planning board to look at some noise related standards in both the Freeport subdivision ordinance and the Freeport zoning ordinance. You don't have that yet, so it is a little bit further out, but I would say you have 2 big projects in the queue and a few smaller things. Does anyone have thoughts on the solar, and if you feel like you want to move forward with it at this time? Furthermore, would you be ready to go to public hearing, or do you want a refresher since it's been a while since you last looked at it?
I think given, do we have, let's see, Wayne, you were on the board, I think, for solar, right? But we do have a new member.
Yeah, so Rosemary would probably
while.
recuse because she
Oh,
hadn't
right, even with
been
a
on it
refresher,
before.
yeah. Okay.
I think Anna was on the board for the whole conversation. Wayne, have you talked about solar with the board before?
I think it did come up on my first.
Oh, yeah, first meeting, the last in-person meeting we had.
Right, right.
So I guess then for the rest of you, if we might have a few recusals, do you feel like you're good to go, or do you want a refresher on where you were at with that?
Speaking for myself, I feel pretty good with it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if public hearing wise, if with this downtown density conversation, if that might be something to wait until we finish up with that.
I think it seems like there might be a little bit of a, well, I guess I don't know entirely what we have next month, but it is next month a possibility to sneak the solar on the schedule for a public hearing, and or not sneak it in like a covert kind of way, put it on the schedule with all of this notification, and get it.
I would say 2 things. If we're going to do the solar, we definitely want to confirm that, minus unforeseen circumstances, that we do it at a meeting where we are going to have 100% board attendance, because it's not really something that we could easily table or prefer not to table unless we absolutely had to. You could do it on the January 6th meeting. The only downside there is then, notices are going out right before Christmas. So are people going to pay attention to the notices that we mail them right before Christmas? I like to think so, but I'm not entirely sure, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I guess personally, I feel like, we've seen that Zoom can work for a big public event, and I'd rather get it off of, get it out the door. We did work pretty hard on it a while ago, and I'd love to finish it. And I think it's going to be probably a couple of months before we tackle some of this density stuff in a public, an official public hearing format. So I guess, if we can get it done before that, it seems like we may have that opportunity.
Yeah,
Caroline,
I definitely wouldn't put them on together for sure.
Yeah, well, yes, absolutely not.
Did you say roughly 2/3 of the town will receive the mailer?
Yeah, because you're looking at adding the use in various capacities in so many zones. I mean, the RR1 zone alone is quite a few people. We have about 4,500 assessed parcels, so I'm not sure what the total is. We never really get large quantities of people for meetings. Last month was an amazing turnout of the public to be involved in something. So we do have the 500 capacity. Should we exceed that, we would probably have to table it and
That's
find
what I was
another.
wondering.
Yeah, would have to find another solution because we do want everybody to be able to have the opportunity to participate. I could only imagine if we could actually get 500 people to participate, that would be like almost, such a huge percentage of the population. But so it is a little bit of a risk. We do want to make sure we can accommodate, there's some different ways we can do that to make sure we can accommodate everybody.
In the spirit of moving things along, I would be in favor of scheduling the public hearing on the solar topic.
Yeah, I'm willing. I know it's not, I don't have to actually send out all the mail. So it's an easy risk for me to take that risk, but I'd be in favor of doing it. And I think, we saw a huge public involvement last month for the KV Enterprise. We'd need it, 3.5 times that. And I think it's unlikely.
Yeah.
So I will take that into consideration. I'm going to shoot for a January 6th, hearing that you guys want to move it forward. The next date after that would be February 3rd. I'm going to try for January 6th. As you know, Town Hall was closed due to a COVID case. We have a lot of staff that is just wrapping up their quarantine and will be finally coming back to the office. So once we get our staff back and can accommodate, I'll look and make sure that we can handle that. I think, the way it falls, I'd probably want to make sure that if we were going to do it, we could get notice out a little bit early. So I'm going to shoot for January, but if it's not realistic timeline, then we will put that on for the first meeting in February.
And it seems like, if it becomes apparent in a week or two that we're not going to make the January for solar, maybe we tackle a couple of those little public notification things.
Yeah, we could, or, we could always, the other thing, we could put the January meeting off, a week or two, bump it out to give more time. All right, let me handle January 6th, and then I'll reach out to the board and let you know. Does everyone believe that they're available that night, January 6th at 6 o'clock, first Wednesday?
Or we can't get snowed out anymore, right? So
I guess only I could, but I don't have to be in the office. And so the other thing that we have out there is the comp plan. So as you know, we have a comprehensive plan that was last done in 2011. We started with a community survey in 2008, and then the planning board worked on that. It was a project that we did in-house with our past staff. Comp plans are, you do it and you submit it to the state, and they, make a determination if it's found to be consistent with the Maine Growth Management Act. They give it that kind of stamp of approval, and that certification lasts for 12 years. After the 12 years, people often say it expires. Realistically, the state considers the status unknown. So our plan, quote unquote, expires in October of 2023. The comp plan is a very involved process involving a lot of different aspects and community groups. Typically, communities are spending between 18 months and 36 months to complete the process. Back this summer, right, we finally got fully staffed in the planning department. I did reach out to the state of Maine and I requested a data package. We just received that back. That will provide us with a lot of links that we can use to kind of update the data section of the comprehensive plan. That includes things like census statistics, different statistics from various state of Maine agencies, again, stuff we would use for the data. We as staff have been researching the comp plan, what our neighboring communities have been doing for approach, timelines, costs. It seems like pretty much most communities are hiring portions of the comp plan out. Some stuff obviously would be done in-house. You know, a lot of the data, some of the data would have to come from here because it's based upon stuff we have at town hall. But most towns are hiring portions of the comp plan update out. The council did talk about it last night. I think as many of us, or I know myself, I've been hearing for a while that the community feels like it's time to update the comp plan. We've seen significant changes in the past 10 years to things like sustainability, you know, technology, green building, downtown Freeport, housing, you know, there's been a lot of change. And so last night, the council talked about it and they're hearing the same thing. So I think, Sam, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're eager for the planning board to get started on the process of updating the comp plan, or at least talking about what that process is going to be so that we can get started as a community. And while there's a lot of momentum from the community and the community wants to be involved and share their opinion, because that's such a big part of the comp plan, which usually starts with a survey. Sam, did you have anything else to add from the council meeting last night where they talked about the comp plan?
No, I think it's basically just what you said, which is that, I mean, we should send KV Enterprises a gift basket for all of this momentum that they've generated for, you know, interest in our board and our process and updating the comp plan. I mean, I think, you know, it's momentum that hopefully we can capitalize on. And so, yeah, I guess and we've been talking about it on the board for a while. So I think it's, you know, it's the time to get started and learn more about the process. I personally, I feel like I don't, you know, I know sort of broadly what's involved, but I don't yet have a sense of what's going to be involved, and who is going to be involved and what their roles are going to be and how we'll sort of steer this, what feels like it could be a pretty massive ship. You know,
yeah, I think it's something, you know, would work on, obviously, while a lot of other things are being worked on. For this fiscal year, which expires June 30, we do have $25,000 in the municipal budget to put towards the comp plan. You know, I think we need to figure out the best strategy that we want to take for Freeport, and the best way to use the financing we have available. My thought is that, you know, originally I was thinking, well, we could do some of the data updating or a survey, knowing that our community is eager to be heard and share their thoughts. I think, you know, doing the survey as soon as possible, you know, in a right way, an effective way, and asking the right questions might be the way to go if we can do it within our resources. So Cecilia, who's actually on the call, our new assistant planner, and I have been researching it. We will continue to research it. And as we come up with more of a planner outline, I'll bring it back to you. But I did want to mention it because, like I said, the council talked about it and we've heard a lot of that in the comments from the public.
Yeah, it seems like a great time for high participation in a survey. You know, I think people would be excited to respond right now. They feel like they have things.
Yeah, Sam, I would echo that comment. Now would be a great time to get participation on a community survey.
Yeah, and, you know, I don't know if Keith's still on here or not, but there's been some talk about this, you know, vision that FEDC is working on for the downtown area. And I think part of that is also community involvement in the survey. And so, you know, we'll want to make sure that we coordinate our efforts so that we can, you know, work together, use information, but aren't bombarding people. We want to do it in a way so it's clear what people are being asked to give feedback on and what it's going to be used for. So we'll make sure that we're paying attention and publicly coordinating so that we can both maximize involvement for two very important projects for Freeport. Does anyone have any other comments on any of the other zoning stuff I rattled off? Anything that if we have a little unforeseen lull you really want to tackle first, or?
Are we all set weren't we waiting from some data or information from the state in regards to the shoreline zoning?
Yeah, so we actually hired a consultant, Mike Morse, who actually used to work for DEP. We hired him to do the draft updates to the ordinance. We do have them. We got them back. We have not had a chance to go through them due to the workload that we've had in front of us. So we have that, I think, in fairly good shape. The last piece we'll have to complete is just to update the mapping, which we anticipate we can complete in-house. We had a good start on that before. We just need to kind of fine tune and incorporate any new amendments, because whatever comes with that conversation will be the new official zoning map.
Okay.
I would really like to see you, I mean, that and solar are both big projects with such big notifications. So I'd like to see us wrap up one before we dive into the next, as far as those two go, because just they're so big.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think our plan of, shooting for solar, if we can't get it done in January, we try to get the little notification things done. And then, it seems like we'll be waiting from FEDC data for at least a little bit, and we can continue that discussion in the meantime, but without a public hearing. So it seems like a reasonable roadmap.
Okay, that
sound good?
Sounds good. Now, do you want to jump to the next item?
Yeah. Non-items item.
Yes, non-agenda persons wishing to address the board on non-agenda items. We still have
Excellent.
6 people that have hung on all night. So if anyone wants to address the board on non-agenda items, they can raise their hand. Seeing no hands raised.
All right. Next agenda item. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
And excellent. All in favor? Uh-oh, I don't have the right view for this. Hold on a second. Robert.
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
Rosemary.
Yes.
Wayne.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
And Anna. Is Anna still here? I don't know if Anna's still here or not, but I think that's I also vote yes for the record. So that's a quorum.
All right.
All right.
So
Have a good night, all.
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
And we'll see you next month.
And Rosemary, I'll reach out to you next week and we can connect.
Oh, great. Great
Okay.
for training. That's great.
All right.
you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Night.
Happy holidays.
Thanks. You too.